a voicemail, a wrong button press, and the entire company just heard her call her boss a dangerously attractive controller. Ava Mercer stood in the elevator, her heart pounding, knowing her 10-year career had just crumbled in 30 seconds of carelessness. But what awaited her on the 48th floor wasn't humiliation or firing. It was an offer from the man she had just publicly denounced, an offer that would force her to work alongside him for the next 4 months. And when Damien Vale looked straight into her eyes with an unreadable gaze, Ava realized this was just the beginning. Follow this story to the end, and comment on where you're starting from so I know how far this story has come. The subway doors hissed shut half a second before Ava could get through them. She slammed her palm against the graffitied metal and swore loud enough that a businessman in an overcoat glanced up from his phone with the kind of disapproval only New Yorkers can muster at 6:45 in the morning. "Perfect," she muttered, watching the train pull away into the tunnel. "Absolutely perfect." Her phone buzzed. 4 missed calls from her assistant, 7 unread emails, a calendar notification screaming in all caps. Executive briefing, 7 a.m. Do not be late. She was going to be late. Ava Mercer had worked at Blackthorne and Vale Consulting for 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. In all that time, she had never once been late. Not during the blizzard of 2023 when half of Manhattan shut down. Not during the morning her radiator exploded and flooded her studio apartment. Not even the day her father had emergency surgery and she'd spent the night in a hospital waiting room, surviving on vending machine coffee and sheer willpower. But today, somehow, her alarm hadn't gone off. She stood on the platform in wrinkled slacks and a blouse she'd grabbed from the floor, her hair still damp from the world's fastest shower, and felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders like something physical. 3 hours of sleep, maybe 4. The Kellerman merger had kept her at the office until 2 in the morning, and she'd stumbled home in an Uber with her laptop bag cutting bruises into her shoulder and numbers still swimming behind her eyelids. The next train wouldn't arrive for 6 minutes. 6 minutes she didn't have. Ava pulled out her phone and opened the voice message app. The one she and her best friend Riley used when texting felt like too much effort. She hit record and started walking toward the stairs, hoping she could catch a cab on the street. "Riley, I'm dead. I'm actually dead." Her voice came out raspy and desperate. "I overslept. Me. I never oversleep. And of all the mornings to do it, I picked today. The day we're briefing Damien Vale on the Kellerman strategy. You know the guy who once fired someone for showing up 3 minutes late to a meeting? That Damien Vale." She pushed through the turnstile and took the subway steps 2 at a time, her heels clicking against concrete. "I'm serious. If I lose my job over this, I'm moving to your couch, and you're legally required to feed me wine and tell me I'm pretty until I find another soul-crushing corporate position where I can slowly lose my will to live." She laughed, but it sounded slightly unhinged. "God, I'm so tired I can't even see straight. Do you know what he made me do yesterday? He had me rewrite the entire executive summary 6 times. 6. And every time I brought it back, he just looked at it with that face. You know the face. Like I'd handed him a napkin with crayon scribbles instead of a 40-page strategy document." So she emerged onto the street. Rain was starting to fall, of course, because the universe had a sense of humor. And the worst part? The absolute worst part? Ava stepped off the curb, trying to flag down a cab. He's not even wrong. Every change he makes is better. Every critique is valid. Which makes him even more infuriating because I can't even hate him properly. I just have to stand there and take it while he systematically dismantles my work with that voice of his. That stupidly calm, controlled, dangerously attractive. She stopped herself. "I didn't say that. You didn't hear that. I'm delirious. Forget I said anything about attractive. Although, let's be honest, the man looks like he was designed in a lab specifically to make women forget how to form coherent sentences. Which is probably why half the associate pool has a crush on him, despite the fact that he has the emotional range of a glacier and the personality of a tax audit." A cab pulled over. Finally, she yanked the door open and slid into the back seat. "Anyway, if I survived this morning without getting fired, let's get drinks. I need to remember what it feels like to be a human being instead of a corporate robot. Love you. Wish me luck." She hit stop and send in one motion, then gave the driver the address of the Blackthorne and Vale building on 6th Avenue. The cab lurched forward into morning traffic. Ava leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes, trying to center herself. She could salvage this. She'd walk in, apologize professionally for the delay, and deliver the briefing flawlessly. Damien Vale might be terrifying, but she knew the Kellerman strategy inside and out. She'd lived and breathed that merger for 3 months. She could handle one presentation, even running on fumes. Her phone buzzed. She opened her eyes and looked at the screen. The blood drained from her face. Message delivered to Blackthorne and Vale. All staff num. No, 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 no. Her hands started shaking. She opened the message thread with trembling fingers, desperately hoping she'd misread it, that her exhausted brain was playing tricks on her. But there it was. The voice note. 3 minutes and 42 seconds long, sent to the company-wide channel instead of Riley's personal contact. Sent to all 360 employees of Blackthorne and Vale Consulting, including the senior partners, including Damien Vale. For a moment, Ava couldn't breathe. The air in the cab felt too thick, too hot. She stared at the screen, watching as little gray checkmarks appeared next to names as people listened to the message. 1 checkmark, then another, then 5, then 12. Her career was over. 3 years of 80-hour weeks. 3 years of sacrificing friendships and sleep and any semblance of a personal life. 3 years of clawing her way up from junior associate to senior strategist, proving herself in a firm where women had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Gone. Because she'd been too tired to double-check a recipient before hitting send. The cab stopped at a red light. Ava looked up and saw the Blackthorne and Vale building rising into the gray October sky, all glass and steel and corporate ambition. 48 floors of cutthroat consulting where mercy was a foreign concept and mistakes were career-ending. She could run. She could tell the driver to turn around, take her to Penn Station, and she could get on a train to literally anywhere else. She had some money saved. She could start over in a different city, a different industry, a different life. But that wasn't who she was. Ava Mercer didn't run, even when every instinct screamed at her to disappear, even when the humiliation felt like it might physically kill her. She didn't run. She paid the driver with shaking hands and stepped out onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. The building's revolving doors spun with their usual indifferent rhythm. She walked through them into the marble lobby where she'd entered 1,000 times before, but this time it felt different. This time she felt like a dead woman walking. The security guard at the desk looked up as she approached. His expression was carefully neutral, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Pity, maybe. Or secondhand embarrassment. He knew. Of course he knew. Everyone knew. Ava swiped her badge and walked to the elevators on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. A group of junior associates stood waiting for the next car. They saw her coming and their conversation died mid-sentence. One of them, a guy named Marcus, who'd started the same month she had, made eye contact for half a second before looking away. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. Ava stepped inside alone. The doors closed and she was sealed in with her reflection in the polished steel walls. She looked like hell. Hair still damp and unstyled. Mascara slightly smudged. Blouse wrinkled at the hem where she'd tucked it in too quickly. And in approximately 3 minutes, she would have to walk onto the 48th floor and face the consequences of her stupidity. The elevator began to rise. Floor 10, floor 15, floor 20. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't help herself. It was an email. From Damien Vale's assistant. Subject, meeting request, urgent. Ms. Mercer, Mr. Vale has requested your presence in his office immediately upon arrival. Please come directly to the executive suite. Jennifer Chen, executive assistant to Damien Vale. Ava felt her stomach drop. Floor 30, floor 35, floor 40. She tried to breathe normally, tried to think of what she would say, how she would explain, how she would apologize for calling him controlling and arrogant and, God help her, dangerously attractive in a voice note that was now probably being forwarded and replayed in every department across the company. Floor 45, floor 46, floor 47. The elevator slowed. Floor 48. The doors opened onto the executive floor of Blackthorne and Vale, where the carpet was thicker and the lighting was warmer, and the air itself seemed to carry the weight of money and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined one wall, offering a view of Manhattan that made you feel like you owned the city. Glass-walled offices stood like transparent fortresses along the perimeter, and at the far end of the floor, Past the designer furniture and the assistants' desks and the conference rooms where billion-dollar deals were made was the corner office, Damien Vale's office. Ava stepped out of the elevator. Every head in the open workspace turned toward her. Conversation stopped. Someone's coffee cup paused halfway to their mouth. The silence was excruciating. She kept her chin up and walked forward like she had every right to be there, like her entire professional reputation wasn't currently circling the drain. Her heels clicked against the hardwood with each step, too loud in the awful quiet. Jennifer Chen sat at her desk outside Damien's office, immaculate as always in a charcoal suit with her dark hair pulled into a perfect bun. She looked up as Ava approached, and for just a moment something almost like sympathy crossed her face. "Miss Mercer," Jennifer's voice was professionally neutral. "Mr. Vale is expecting you." "I know." Ava's voice came out steadier than she expected. "Is he—" "He didn't say." Jennifer glanced at the closed door behind her. "But he's been in there since 6:30. Which meant he'd been there when the voice note went out, which meant he'd heard it. Of course he'd heard it." Ava nodded, not trusting herself to say anything else. She walked past Jennifer's desk and raised her hand to knock on the door. "Come in." His voice came through the wood before her knuckles made contact. She pushed the door open. Damien Vale stood with his back to her, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline. He was tall, over 6 feet, with the kind of build that suggested he actually used the executive gym membership instead of letting it gather dust. Dark suit tailored precisely to his frame. No tie, which was unusual. Top button of his shirt undone, which was even more unusual. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. The office itself was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd built one of the most successful consulting firms in New York before he was 40. Modern, minimalist, expensive. A desk made of dark wood and chrome, leather chairs, abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than Ava's annual salary. Everything in its place, everything controlled, except the man himself, who radiated tension like a live wire. "Close the door," he said, without turning around. Ava did. The click of the latch sounded too final. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She stood there with her heart hammering and her palms sweating, waiting for the axe to fall, waiting for him to turn around and destroy her with whatever cutting words he'd prepared. But he just kept looking out the window. "I overslept," she said finally, because the silence was unbearable. "There's no excuse. I take full responsibility. It won't happen again." "I don't care that you were late." His voice was quiet, controlled, which somehow made it worse. He turned to face her, and Ava felt the full force of his attention like a physical thing. Damien Vale had the kind of face that belonged in boardrooms and courtrooms and anywhere else people needed to be intimidated into submission. Sharp jaw, strong features, eyes so dark they were almost black, and an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. He looked at her for what felt like an eternity. "I listened to your message," he said. Ava's throat closed. "Mr. Vale, 3 times. He cut her off smoothly. "I listened to it 3 times, just to make sure I heard correctly." She wanted to sink through the floor. She wanted to evaporate into nothing. She wanted to go back in time and shake her exhausted past self until she learned to check the recipient before sending a goddamn voice note. "The first time," he continued, walking slowly toward his desk, "I was impressed by your honesty. It takes courage to voice criticism, even privately, even accidentally." He picked up a tablet from his desk. "The second time I was angry, not at the criticism itself, but at the lack of discretion, the carelessness." He looked up at her. "The third time I was fascinated." Ava blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You called me controlling." He said it like he was reading from a list. "Arrogant. You compared working with me to being systematically dismantled. You said I have the emotional range of a glacier and the personality of a tax audit." She felt heat rising in her face. "Mr. Vale, and then," he continued, "you said I was dangerously attractive." The world stopped. Ava couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stand there while her entire body burned with mortification. I didn't mean..." "Which part?" Damien's voice was too calm, too measured. "The controlling part? The arrogant part? Or the dangerously attractive part?" "All of it. None of it." I was exhausted and not thinking clearly, and it was supposed to be private, and I never meant for anyone to hear it, especially not you. And I understand if you want to fire me, but please know that I have nothing but respect for this firm and for you and Miss Mercer." He held up one hand. "Stop." She stopped. He set the tablet down and walked around his desk until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle, close enough that her traitorous body responded in ways that were absolutely inappropriate for someone who was about to be unemployed. "I'm not going to fire you," he said. Ava stared at him. "You're not?" "No. But You embarrassed yourself. You didn't breach confidentiality. You didn't compromise client information. You didn't do anything that actually damages the firm." He tilted his head slightly. "Although I imagine the humiliation is punishment enough." It was. God, it was. "However," he continued, "we do have a problem." Of course they did. "The Kellerman merger," Damien said. "Brian Holbrook was supposed to lead it." Ava knew Brian. Senior partner, 15 years at the firm. Brilliant strategist. Complete asshole who'd spent the last 3 years taking credit for other people's work and throwing junior associates under the bus whenever a project went south. "He was supposed to present the strategy this morning," Damien said, "but he didn't show up." "What?" "He called Jennifer at 6:15 from a hospital in the Hamptons. Apparently he was playing tennis yesterday and tore his Achilles tendon. He'll be out for at least 3 months. Ava's mind raced. "So who's taking over?" Damien looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes. "You are." The floor tilted. "I'm sorry, what?" "The Kellerman merger is worth $1.3 billion. It involves coordinating 17 executives across 3 continents, navigating hostile board members, managing political landmines, and restructuring an entire corporate framework. It's the biggest account this firm has handled in 5 years. He paused. "And you know it better than anyone." "But I'm not a senior partner." "You've been living this project for 3 months. You wrote most of the strategy. Brian's name was on it, but we both know whose work it really was." Ava felt dizzy. "Mr. Vale, This project will require direct coordination with me. Daily meetings, international travel, constant pressure. You'll be representing the firm to clients who will try to tear you apart. You'll have senior partners questioning your decisions. You'll have rivals trying to undermine you." He leaned against his desk. "And you'll be doing it while the entire company knows you called me dangerously attractive." She closed her eyes. "This is a nightmare. This is an opportunity. It's humiliation. It's a test." His voice was sharp enough to cut. "You can run from it. Submit your resignation. Leave New York. Start over somewhere else where no one's heard that voice note. Or you can stay. Lead this project. Prove that you earned this position through your work, not through any other reason people might invent." Ava opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time, she noticed how tired he seemed. Not just physically tired. There were shadows under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. Tension in his jaw that suggested too many nights with too little sleep. But tired in a deeper way. Like he was exhausted from carrying something heavy for too long. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Because you're good at your job," he said simply. "And because I don't care what you think of me personally, as long as you deliver results professionally." "Even after everything I said?" Something flickered across his face, too fast to identify. "Especially after everything you said." Before she could process that, he straightened and crossed his arms. "The first meeting with the Kellerman board is in 4 days. You'll need to be fully briefed by then. I'll have Jennifer clear your schedule. You report directly to me now. Questions?" Ava had about 1,000 questions, but only one that mattered. "Do you actually think I can do this?" Damien Vale looked at her for a long moment. And then, for the first time since she'd entered his office, something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Miss Mercer," he said quietly, "I think you're capable of far more than you realize." He moved past her to open the door, the conversation clearly over. "Now go. You have work to do." Ava walked to the door on shaking legs, her entire world upside down. She was still employed. She was leading a billion-dollar merger. She was reporting directly to Damien Vale, the man she'd just publicly called dangerously attractive. She stepped into the hallway and heard his voice behind her, low and controlled and carrying just far enough for her to hear. "And Miss Mercer?" She turned. Damien stood in his doorway, backlit by the Manhattan skyline, his expression unreadable. "Don't oversleep again." The door closed. Ava stood there for a moment, processing. Then she walked past Jennifer's desk, past the assistant's workspace, past the junior associates who were definitely whispering about her. She made it to the women's bathroom before her legs gave out. She locked herself in a stall and sat down on the closed toilet lid, hands shaking, heart racing, mind spinning. What the hell just happened? She'd walked in expecting termination and walked out with a promotion. She'd committed career suicide and somehow landed the biggest opportunity of her life. She'd humiliated herself in front of the entire firm and been rewarded for it. None of it made sense. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out and saw messages from Riley. 23 of them, each more panicked than the last. Riley. "Oh my God, Riley. Oh my God." Riley. "Ava. What did you do?" Riley. "Did you actually send a voice note calling your boss hot to the entire company?" Riley. "Are you alive?" Riley. "I'm calling you." Riley. "Why aren't you answering?" Riley. "If you're dead, I'm going to kill you." Ava typed out a response with trembling fingers. Ava. "Not dead, not fired, leading the Kellerman merger. I don't understand anything anymore." The response came back immediately. Riley. "What?" Riley. "How is that possible?" Riley. "Did he hit his head?" Riley. "Did you hit your head?" Riley. "This is insane." Riley. "You need to tell me everything." Ava put her phone away. She couldn't think about it right now, couldn't analyze it or question it or try to figure out Damien Vale's motivations. She just had to survive. She stood up and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Still wrinkled, still exhausted, still the same person who'd woken up this morning thinking her worst problem was being late. But something had shifted. Something fundamental had changed in the moment Damien Vale looked at her and said, "You're capable of far more than you realize. Not you should be grateful, not you're lucky, but you're capable." Like he'd seen something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. Ava washed her hands, fixed her hair as much as possible, and walked back out into the hallway. The whispers started immediately. She ignored them. She took the elevator down to the 32nd floor, where her cubicle sat in a maze of identical workspaces. Her desk was exactly how she'd left it last night. Laptop closed, coffee cup still half full of cold espresso, sticky notes covering every available surface with reminders and deadlines and half-formed strategies. But now there was something new. A folder, black leather, expensive, sitting in the exact center of her desk. She picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single page, typed on Blackthorn and Vale letterhead, signed by Damien Vale himself. Project Reassignment Notice. Effective immediately, Ava Mercer, Senior Strategist, is assigned as Lead Strategist for the Kellerman Global Restructuring Project. Duration, 4 months. Direct report, Managing Partner Damien Vale. Authorization level, executive clearance for all project-related decisions and international travel. At the bottom, handwritten in black ink, "Don't make me regret this." DV. Ava sank into her desk chair and stared at the paper. 4 months. 4 months of working directly with Damien Vale. 4 months of proving herself while everyone in the firm watched and judged and waited for her to fail. 4 months of daily meetings with a man who now knew exactly what she thought of him. Her phone buzzed again. Another email from Jennifer Chen. Subject, schedule update. Ms. Mercer, your first briefing session with Mr. Vale is scheduled for 3 p.m. today in Conference Room A. Please bring all current Kellerman files. Also, Mr. Vale has requested that you join him for dinner tomorrow night at 7 p.m. to discuss the strategic approach. Location details to follow. Jennifer Chen. Ava read the email 3 times. Dinner with Damien Vale. She dropped her head into her hands and laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that drew concerned looks from the associate in the next cubicle over. This morning she'd been worried about being 3 minutes late. Now she was having dinner with her boss. The boss she'd accidentally told 300 people was dangerously attractive. The universe, Ava decided, had a truly twisted sense of humor. She opened her laptop and pulled up the Kellerman files. If she was going to do this, if she was actually going to lead a billion-dollar merger while navigating the wreckage of her own catastrophic mistake, she needed to be perfect. Not good. Perfect. Because Damian Vale didn't accept anything less. And despite everything, despite the humiliation and the confusion and the fear, part of her wanted to prove him right. Wanted to show him that his faith in her hadn't been misplaced. Wanted to be capable of everything he seemed to think she could do. Hours passed. The office filled with the usual sounds of phones ringing and keyboards clicking and hushed conversations about quarterly projections. The Manhattan skyline outside her window shifted from gray morning light to pale afternoon sun filtering through clouds. At 2:45, she gathered her files and headed to conference room A. It was one of the smaller conference rooms designed for intimate meetings rather than full-board presentations. Glass walls, oval table, whiteboard covering one wall, and sitting at the head of the table, already reviewing documents, was Damian. He looked up as she entered. "You're early." "I didn't want to risk being late twice in one day." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Sit." Ava sat across from him and spread her files across the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She could hear her own heartbeat in the silence. "Tell me about Kellerman," Damian said finally. She took a breath and began. And for the next 3 hours, they worked. It was brutal. Damian tore apart her analysis with surgical precision, questioning every assumption, challenging every projection, finding weak points she hadn't even considered. He made her defend decisions Brian Holbrook had made, strategies she'd written but never had to argue for. He pushed her harder than anyone had ever pushed her, refusing to accept vague answers or uncertain conclusions. But here's what Ava realized as they worked. He was teaching her. Every critique came with an explanation. Every challenge came with guidance. When she stumbled, he didn't mock her. He redirected. When she pushed back, he listened. And when she made a point he couldn't refute, something like respect crossed his face. By 6 o'clock, Ava's brain felt like it had been put through a blender. But she also understood the Kellerman project in a way she never had before. Not as Brian's strategy that she'd helped write. As her strategy. Her responsibility. "That's enough for today," Damian said, closing his tablet. "Go home. Sleep. Tomorrow we'll tackle the board presentation." Ava gathered her files with hands that were only slightly shaking from exhaustion. She stood and started toward the door. "Miss Mercer." She turned. Damian was looking at her with that unreadable expression again. "You did well today." It shouldn't have mattered. It was just 3 words. Just basic professional feedback. But Ava felt warmth spread through her chest anyway. "Thank you, Mr. Vale." She left the conference room and walked to the elevator. The 48th floor was mostly empty now, just a few workaholics still hunched over their desks. She stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of the executive suite. Damian was still in the conference room, standing at the window, looking out at Manhattan with an expression that was almost sad. Then the doors shut, and he disappeared. Ava rode down alone, thinking about dangerous attraction and impossible situations, and the way Damian Vale had looked at her when he said you're capable of far more than you realize. Outside, night was falling over New York. The streets were filling with people heading home or heading out, living their normal lives, completely unaware that Ava Mercer's entire world had just tilted sideways. She walked to the subway, exhaustion settling into her bones. Got on the train heading downtown. Watched the stations blur past. When she finally got back to her tiny studio apartment, she collapsed on her bed, still wearing her wrinkled blouse and slacks. Her phone buzzed with another message from Riley, demanding details, but Ava was too tired to respond. She closed her eyes and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. But all she could think about was tomorrow night, dinner, with Damian Vale, just the two of them. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that this was only the beginning. That she'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a voice note sent to the wrong recipient. That the real story was just starting. Ava fell asleep with that thought spinning through her exhausted brain, completely unaware that in 4 months' time, she would be standing in a courthouse signing her name next to Damian Vale's. And the voice note that had almost destroyed her would become the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. But that would come later. For now, she just had to survive tomorrow. The restaurant was the kind of place Ava had only read about in magazines. The kind where there was no sign outside, just a discreet brass number on a door in the West Village. Where reservations required 3 months' notice, and the wine list had bottles that cost more than her monthly rent. Where the lighting was low and intimate, and every table was positioned for maximum privacy. Ava stood outside at 6:58, wearing the only designer dress she owned, a simple black sheath she'd bought on sale 2 years ago for her cousin's wedding. Her hands were cold despite the mild evening. Her stomach churned with nerves she couldn't quite name. This was professional, just a business dinner, strategy discussion, nothing more. She pushed open the door. The maitre d' looked up with the kind of practiced smile that suggested he knew exactly who she was and why she was there. "Miss Mercer, Mr. Vale is expecting you." Of course Damien had given them her name. Of course he'd planned this down to the last detail. That was who he was, a man who controlled everything around him with terrifying precision. She followed the maitre d' through the restaurant, past tables where couples leaned close in conversation, past waiters moving with silent efficiency, to a corner booth partially hidden by a silk screen. Damien sat with his back to the wall, already working on his phone. He'd changed from his usual suit into something more casual, dark jeans, a gray Henley that showed off the build she'd been trying very hard not to notice. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd run his hands through it too many times. He looked up as she approached, and something flickered across his face. Too fast to read. "You found it." He stood, the gesture automatic and old-fashioned. "I wasn't sure the address was clear." "It was fine." Ava slid into the booth across from him, acutely aware of how small the table was, how close they were sitting. "This place is nice. It's quiet." He set his phone face down on the table. "No one from the firm comes here. We can talk freely." Right, because everywhere else in Manhattan, they'd be watched, judged, photographed on someone's phone and turned into office gossip by morning. A waiter appeared with menus and water. Damien ordered wine without asking her preference, a bottle of something French that she didn't recognize but that probably cost more than her subway card. The waiter disappeared. Silence settled between them. Ava fidgeted with her napkin. "So?" "The Kellerman strategy." "We're not talking about Kellerman tonight." She looked up sharply. "Then why am I here?" Damien leaned back against the leather booth, his dark eyes fixed on her with unsettling intensity. "Because if we're going to work together for the next 4 months, I need to know who you are. You've worked with me for 3 years. I've worked with your resume, your performance metrics, your strategist persona." He tilted his head slightly. "But I don't know you, Ava." The use of her first name sent a small shock through her system. In 3 years, he'd never once called her anything but Ms. Mercer. "What do you want to know?" She kept her voice steady. "Why consulting?" The question caught her off guard. "What? Why did you choose this career, this firm, this life of 80-hour weeks and corporate warfare, and slowly losing your soul to PowerPoint presentations?" A slight smile touched his mouth. "Your words, not mine." Heat crept up her neck. "You're never going to let me live that down, are you?" "Probably not." The smile faded. "But I'm serious. Why are you here?" Ava took a sip of water, buying time. The truth was complicated, messy. Not the kind of thing you shared with your boss over expensive French wine, but he was still watching her, waiting, and something about the way he looked at her made her want to be honest. "My father," she said finally. "He worked construction his entire life, 40 years breaking his back so my brother and I could have better. When I got accepted to Columbia, he cried. Not because he was happy, though he was, but because he finally had proof that all those years mattered, that his kids were going to be okay." She traced the rim of her water glass with one finger. "He had a heart attack my senior year. Survived it, but barely. And I remember sitting in that hospital room, watching him sleep hooked up to machines, thinking that I needed to make something of myself. Something big enough to justify everything he sacrificed. So you chose the most brutal industry possible." "I chose success." She met his eyes. "I chose security. I chose the ability to write him a check when his medical bills got too high, to buy him a house in a good neighborhood, to make sure he never has to worry about money again." "And what about what you want?" The question landed like a punch. This is what I want. Is it? Damien's voice was quiet, dangerous. Or is it what you think you're supposed to want? Before Ava could respond, the waiter returned with the wine. He poured 2 glasses with ceremonial precision and disappeared again. Damien picked up his glass but didn't drink. I know something about obligation, about building a life to meet other people's expectations. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It's exhausting. You don't strike me as someone who cares about other people's expectations. No? Something cold flashed in his eyes. Then you haven't been paying attention. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and somehow vulnerable. For the first time, Ava saw a crack in the armor. Saw the exhaustion she'd noticed yesterday morning, but deeper now. More honest. What happened? She asked softly. Damien was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his wine glass and looked at her with an expression that was almost defiant. I had a brother, he said, younger by 3 years. His name was Marcus. The past tense sent ice through her veins. We started this firm together. I was the strategist. He was the creative. I built the frameworks. He sold the vision. We were unstoppable. His voice was carefully controlled, but Ava could hear the grief underneath, raw and barely contained. And then one night, he was driving home from a client dinner and someone ran a red light. He died on impact. Damien, that was 5 years ago. He picked up his wine and took a long drink. The firm was his dream as much as mine. Maybe more. So I kept building it, kept expanding, kept pushing until Blackthorn and Vale became everything we'd imagined and more. Because if I stopped, if I slowed down even for a second, I'd have to face the fact that I was doing it alone. Ava felt her throat tighten. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. His voice was sharp now, defensive. I'm telling you this because you need to understand something. When I push you, when I demand perfection, when I make you rewrite a strategy 6 times at 3 a.m, it's not personal. It's not about control. It's because I know what it's like to lose everything you built, and I will not let that happen to this firm. I will not let mediocrity destroy what my brother died believing in. The words landed like stones, heavy and final. Ava understood now. Understood the impossible standards, the cold exterior, the man who lived in his office and never seemed to sleep and demanded excellence from everyone around him because anything less felt like betrayal. He'd be proud of you, she said quietly. Damien laughed, a harsh, broken sound. He'd think I was an asshole. Probably. Ava surprised herself by smiling. But he'd still be proud. Something shifted in Damien's expression. The defensiveness faded, replaced by something softer, more real. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone more afraid of me. Ava picked up her wine glass. I am afraid of you. But you're here anyway. Well, she took a sip. Turns out I'm more afraid of letting my father down. They looked at each other across the small table, and for the first time since Ava had walked into his office yesterday morning, she didn't feel like an employee facing her boss. She felt like a person sitting across from another person. Both of them exhausted. Both of them carrying weight they never asked for. Both of them pretending to be stronger than they were. The waiter returned to take their orders. Ava barely tasted the food when it came, too caught up in the conversation that flowed easier now. They talked about the firm, about New York, about the clients they hated and the projects that kept them awake at night. Damien had opinions on everything, sharp and uncompromising, but he also listened, really listened, asked follow-up questions, challenged her views without dismissing them. It was past 10 when they finally left the restaurant. The October air was cool and crisp, carrying the smell of rain. I'll get you a car, Damien said, pulling out his phone. I can take the subway. At this hour? He gave her a look. Not happening. I've been taking the subway at this hour for 3 years. Yes? Well, now you work for me directly, which means I'm responsible for making sure you get home alive. He was already texting his driver. Besides, we have an early flight tomorrow. Ava blinked. Flight? Chicago. The Kellerman board wants a face-to-face before the official presentation. We leave at 7. He looked up from his phone. Jennifer sent you the itinerary this afternoon. She'd been so focused on preparing for tonight that she hadn't checked her email in hours. How long? 3 days. Possibly 4 if negotiations run long. A black car pulled up to the curb. We'll coordinate on the plane. The driver got out and opened the rear door. Ava hesitated, suddenly aware that this night had felt less like a business dinner and more like something else entirely. Something that made her nervous in ways she couldn't name. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "Thank you for coming." Damien's voice was quieter now. "I know this situation isn't easy. The voice note, the gossip, everyone watching to see if you earned this position or if I'm playing favorites." "Are you?" The question came out before she could stop it. He looked at her for a long moment. "Get in the car, Ava." She did. The door closed. Through the tinted window, she watched Damien turn and walk back toward the restaurant, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight with tension. The car pulled away from the curb. Ava leaned her head back against the leather seat and closed her eyes. Her mind was spinning. The dinner had been intimate in ways that terrified her. Damien had been open in ways she never expected. And now she was going to Chicago with him. 3 days in close quarters. 3 days of pretending that tonight hadn't shifted something fundamental between them. Her phone buzzed, a text from Riley. "Riley, how was dinner? Did he fire you? Propose? Both?" Ava smiled despite herself and typed back, "Ava, neither. Just talked. We're going to Chicago tomorrow." Riley, "We?" Riley, "As in you and him?" Riley, "Alone?" Riley, "Oh my God, you're sleeping with your boss." Ava, "I am not sleeping with my boss. This is work." Riley, "Sure, Jan." Riley, "Call me when you get back. I want details." Ava put her phone away and watched Manhattan blur past the window. Neon signs and traffic lights and thousands of people living their lives, completely unaware that hers was tilting into territory she didn't understand. She got home past 11 and fell asleep still wearing her dress, too tired to even undress. The alarm went off at 5:30. Ava groaned and forced herself out of bed, showered, and packed a bag on autopilot. Professional clothes, laptop, files. The essentials for 3 days of corporate warfare. She made it to JFK by 6:15. Jennifer had sent detailed instructions, which terminal, which gate, confirmation numbers for everything. Ava followed them like a map through hostile territory. The gate was mostly empty this early. A few business travelers hunched over laptops. A couple sleeping across 3 chairs. And in the corner, wearing sunglasses despite being indoors, was Damien. He looked up as she approached. "You're early again." Pattern recognition. She set her bag down. "You value punctuality." "I value not missing flights." He stood and grabbed his carry-on. "We're boarding in 10. The plane was small. A private charter, she realized with a jolt. Not commercial. Not even first-class commercial. An actual private jet with cream leather seats and mahogany tables and a flight attendant who greeted them by name. "This is excessive," Ava said as they settled into facing seats. "This is efficient." Damien pulled out his laptop. "We have 3 hours of uninterrupted work time. No crying babies, no chatty neighbors, no overpriced airport Wi-Fi that cuts out every 5 minutes. He wasn't wrong. They worked the entire flight, reviewing the Kellerman board profiles, discussing potential objections, rehearsing responses to hostile questions. By the time they landed in Chicago, Ava's brain felt simultaneously sharp and exhausted. A car was waiting on the tarmac. Of course it was. They drove through downtown Chicago toward a towering glass hotel that probably cost $1,000 a night. "We have rooms on the executive floor," Damien said as they checked in. "Meeting with the board is at 9 tomorrow morning. Tonight we prep." Ava's room was obscenely nice. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. King bed with sheets that felt like clouds. Marble bathroom with a tub the size of her entire apartment. She had exactly 20 minutes to appreciate it before Damien knocked on her door. "Conference call in 10, he said when she opened it. "Kellerman's CFO wants to discuss the timeline." The next 3 days were brutal. The Kellerman board was everything Damien had warned her about. Hostile executives who saw the merger as a threat, political players jockeying for position, old guard managers who resented taking orders from a consulting firm. They questioned every detail of Ava's strategy, challenged every projection, pushed back on every recommendation, and Damien made her fight for it. He didn't step in, didn't defend her, didn't soften the blows. He sat at the end of the table and watched as they tore into her work, his expression unreadable, and only spoke up when the conversation threatened to spiral into chaos. Ms. Mercer has addressed that concern, he'd say calmly. Perhaps if you reviewed slide 18 again. Or, I believe the question was about revenue projections, not political posturing. Or, when one particularly aggressive VP started getting personal. Gentlemen, let's focus on the numbers, not our egos. By the second day, Ava was exhausted. By the third day, she was angry. They were back in her hotel room. She didn't know when it had become the unofficial war room, but somehow all their planning sessions ended up there, and she was pacing back and forth while Damien sat on the couch reviewing notes. "Did you hear what Henderson said to me today?" she demanded. He literally called my analysis ambitious in that tone. That condescending, patronizing, you're a little girl playing dress-up tone. I heard. And you didn't say anything. Because you didn't need me to. Damien looked up from his tablet. You handled it. I shouldn't have to handle it, Ava's voice rose. You're the managing partner. You could shut these assholes down with one sentence, but instead, you just sit there and let them treat me like like you're what? Like I'm only here because you want to fuck me. The words exploded out of her before she could stop them. The room went silent. Damien set down his tablet very slowly. Is that what you think? That's what everyone thinks. Ava's hands were shaking. The entire firm. The Kellerman board. Everyone who looks at us and sees a senior strategist working directly with the managing partner and assumes there's only one reason that's happening. And what reason is that? Don't. She turned away from him. Don't pretend you don't know what people are saying. I know exactly what they're saying. His voice was dangerously quiet. I also know that you delivered a flawless presentation this morning, that you defended every critique Henderson threw at you, that you turned a hostile board around in 3 days through the sheer force of your competence. So unless you actually believe you're only here because I want to sleep with you, I suggest you stop giving a fuck what other people think. Ava spun to face him. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they're whispering about, aren't I? Damien stood, and suddenly the room felt smaller. You think I don't hear the rumors? That I promoted you because you're attractive? That I'm having a midlife crisis? That I'm so desperate for relevance I have to surround myself with young talent? He moved closer. They've been saying it for years. About every associate I've mentored, every project I've overseen. I stopped caring what people thought about me a long time ago. Well, I can't do that. Ava's voice cracked. Because I've spent my entire career trying to prove I belong in rooms like this, and now every achievement I earn gets filtered through the lens of whether I'm sleeping with my boss. Then prove them wrong. I am proving them wrong. Then why do you care what they say? Because... She stopped, closed her eyes, took a shaking breath. Because it's exhausting, fighting this hard, being this alone. When she opened her eyes, Damien was standing much closer, close enough that she could see the gray starting to show at his temples, close enough to see the lines around his eyes that came from too many sleepless nights. You're not alone, he said quietly. Yes, I am. She laughed, but it came out broken. I'm always alone, even when I'm surrounded by people, even when I'm sitting in boardrooms full of executives. I'm alone because I can't let anyone see weakness, can't let anyone see doubt, can't let anyone see that I'm barely holding it together most days. Ava, and the worst part? She looked up at him. The worst part is that you're the only person who seems to understand that, who pushes me because you know I can take it, who doesn't coddle me or protect me or treat me like I'm fragile. And I hate that. I hate that the one person who actually sees me is the one person I can't. She stopped herself, but it was too late. The words hung between them like live wires. Damien was very still. Can't what? Ava's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Nothing. Forget it. Can't what, Ava? She should lie, should deflect, should walk this back before they crossed a line that would destroy everything. But she was so tired of pretending. Can't let myself want, she whispered. The air in the room changed, became charged with something dangerous and inevitable. Damien's jaw tightened. You should go to bed. We have another early morning. It was a dismissal, a retreat, the smartest thing either of them could do. But Ava didn't move. What if I don't want to be smart? The question came out barely above a whisper. Damien closed his eyes like he was in pain. Don't do this. Why not? Because I'm your boss, because it's inappropriate, because if we cross this line, we can't come back from it. And if I don't care? His eyes opened, dark and intense and full of something that made her breath catch. You should care, but I don't. She took a step closer. I don't care about the rumors or the politics or what people will say. I just care that for the first time in years, someone sees me. Really sees me. Not the strategist, not the resume, not the girl trying to make her father proud. Just me. Ava. Her name came out like a warning, like a prayer. If I kiss you right now, everything changes. I know. I won't be able to supervise you anymore. I'll have to remove myself from the project. Your career trajectory will be questioned by everyone. They'll say you slept your way to the top. Let them say it. I'm serious. So am I. She was standing right in front of him now, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body. I'm so tired of being careful, of doing the right thing, of sacrificing everything for a career that doesn't care if I exist. Just once, I want to do something reckless, something that's just for me. Damien's hands clenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself. This is a mistake. Probably. We'll regret it. Maybe. Ava, she kissed him. It wasn't soft, wasn't tentative, wasn't the careful first kiss of two people testing boundaries. It was desperate and hungry, and 3 days of tension finally snapping. His hands came up to frame her face, fingers tangling in her hair, and he kissed her back like a drowning man finding air. They broke apart, breathing hard. This is insane, Damien said against her mouth. I know. Your career, that's... I don't care. You will. He pulled back enough to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face. Tomorrow morning, you'll wake up and realize what we've done, and you'll hate me for it. Then we have tonight. Something in his expression cracked. The control he'd maintained for so long finally shattering under the weight of wanting something he couldn't have. If we do this, he said slowly, if we cross this line, I need you to understand something. This isn't casual for me. This isn't some reckless affair I can walk away from when it gets complicated. Ava's heart hammered. What is it then? I don't know yet. His thumb traced her jawline. But I know it's more than it should be. More than is smart or safe or appropriate. When did you start? 14 months ago. The confession came out rough. You were presenting the Redstone merger strategy. You stood in front of the entire senior partner board and defended your analysis against Wilson's attacks. You didn't back down, didn't apologize, didn't soften your stance. You just stood there and proved you were the smartest person in the room. His jaw clenched. And I realized I was completely fucked. Why didn't you say anything? Because you worked for me. Because I'd spent 5 years building walls around myself, and you walked through them like they were made of paper. Because wanting you at all felt like a betrayal of everything I'd built my life around. He laughed harshly. And because I knew that if I admitted it, if I let myself feel anything, I wouldn't be able to stop. Ava's hands were shaking. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you walk out that door right now, I'll forget this happened. I'll go back to being your boss. We'll finish the Kellerman project. We'll maintain professional boundaries. And in 4 months, you'll move on to the next assignment, and we'll never speak of this again. And if I stay? Damien's eyes burned into hers. If you stay, everything changes. I'll disclose the relationship to the board tomorrow. I'll remove myself from supervising your career. I'll make sure every promotion you earn is scrutinized by independent partners so no one can say you got it because of me. I'll protect your professional reputation even if it costs me mine. Damien, but I won't hide this. I won't sneak around or pretend it doesn't exist. If you stay, I'm all in, completely, publicly. And you need to decide right now if that's what you want or if you're going to walk out that door and save us both. The room was spinning, Ava's entire world narrowing to this moment. This choice. She could leave, should leave. It was the smart decision, the safe decision, the one that protected everything she'd worked for. But when she looked at Damien, really looked at him, she saw something she'd never seen before. Vulnerability, fear, hope. The carefully controlled mask completely gone, leaving only a man who was offering her everything and asking for the same in return. And she realized that she'd been alone for so long. So careful, so focused on building a career that meant something that she'd forgotten to build a life. I'm staying, she whispered. The words had barely left her mouth before Damien was kissing her again, deeper this time, his hand sliding down her back to pull her closer. She melted into him, into the heat and the want and the terrifying relief of finally letting herself feel something real. They stumbled backward toward the bed, shedding clothes and boundaries and 3 years of professional distance. His shirt, her blouse, his hands learning the curve of her waist, her fingers tracing the muscles of his back. When they finally collapsed onto the sheets, breathing hard and tangled together, Ava felt something shift in her chest, like a lock she didn't know existed, clicking open. We're going to regret this, Damien murmured against her shoulder. Probably. She traced patterns on his chest. Do you regret it now? He pulled back to look at her, and his expression was so open it hurt. No, not even a little. They made love slowly, carefully, like they were mapping new territory, learning each other, breaking down every wall they'd built. And when it was over, when they lay exhausted and intertwined in the Chicago hotel room with the city lights glowing through the windows, Ava realized that she'd just burned her entire career to the ground. And she didn't care. She fell asleep in Damien's arms, feeling safer than she had in years. She woke up to her phone ringing. Ava jolted awake, disoriented. The room was dark. Damien was still asleep beside her, one arm thrown across her waist. Her phone was buzzing insistently from the nightstand. She grabbed it. Riley's name flashed across the screen. Riley, it's 4 a.m. Ava. Riley's voice was strange, tight. Have you checked your email? No, what's wrong? Someone leaked. The words were ice water. What? Someone from the firm leaked information about you and Damien. There's an article, Business Insider. It went live 20 minutes ago. Ava's stomach dropped. What does it say? That Damien Vale promoted his mistress to lead the Kellerman merger, that you've been having an affair for months, that the voice note was real and you've been sleeping together since before the project started. Riley's voice cracked. Ava, they're destroying you. The comments they're really bad. The room was spinning. Ava sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest, her entire body going cold. Beside her, Damien stirred. What's wrong? She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at the phone in her hand like it was a bomb that had just gone off. Ava? Riley's voice came through tinny and distant. Are you still there? I have to go. She hung up. Damien was sitting up now, fully awake, his expression shifting from concern to sharp focus. Talk to me. Someone leaked. Her voice didn't sound like her own. There's an article. About us. About... She couldn't finish the sentence. He was already reaching for his phone. She watched his face as he read, watched the color drain from his features, watched his jaw clench with something that might have been rage. Fuck, he said quietly. Ava felt something break inside her chest. This was a mistake. No, yeah. Yes. She was out of the bed now, grabbing her clothes from the floor with shaking hands. This was a massive mistake, and now my career is over, and everyone will think I slept my way to this position, and oh, Ava, stop. I can't stop. Her voice was rising, panic flooding through her veins. Don't you understand? Everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed, it's gone. Because I was stupid enough to... She cut herself off, but the words hung in the air anyway. Stupid enough to fall for you. Damien stood, pulling on his pants. We'll fix this. How? She laughed, but it came out hysterical. How do we fix this? The entire business world just found out that I'm sleeping with my boss. That I got promoted because we're... She couldn't say it. Couldn't name what they were because naming it made it real. And real things could be destroyed. Listen to me. He moved toward her, but she backed away. This doesn't change anything. It changes everything. No. What changed things was us. Last night, this morning. His voice was hard now, commanding. The voice that ran boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals. The article doesn't matter. The gossip doesn't matter. What matters is that we made a choice. A choice that's going to destroy me. Then we destroy them first. Ava stared at him. What? You think I'm going to let some anonymous leak ruin your career? Ruin what we just started? Damien's eyes were dark and dangerous. I've been building this firm for 15 years. I know where everybody is buried. I know which partners have been embezzling, which executives are having affairs, which board members have been insider trading, and I will burn every single bridge I have to protect you. You can't. Watch me. He grabbed his shirt from the floor. We're going back to New York today. I'm calling an emergency board meeting, and I'm going to make it very clear that anyone who questions your competence or suggests you got this position through anything other than merit will answer directly to me. Damien, that's insane. What's insane is letting you believe for 1 second that you don't deserve everything you've earned. He was in front of her now, his hands on her shoulders, his gaze burning into hers. I meant what I said last night. I'm all in, completely, and that means I fight for you, with you, until there's nothing left to fight. Tears were burning behind Ava's eyes. This is going to get ugly. I know. They're going to come after both of us. Let them. You could lose everything. I already lost everything. His voice was raw now, stripped bare. 5 years ago when my brother died. But last night I found something I didn't think I'd get a second chance at, and I will not give it up without a fight. Ava looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd spent 5 years hiding behind walls and work and control. A man who was choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to risk everything, choosing her. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay. We fight. Something fierce and protective blazed in his eyes. He pulled her against his chest and held her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. Get dressed, he said against her hair. We have work to do. They flew back to New York that afternoon. The silence in the private jet was heavy with everything unspoken. Ava stared out the window at the clouds below and tried not to think about what was waiting for them. But she couldn't stop checking her phone, couldn't stop seeing the headlines multiply. Blackthorne and Vale managing partner accused of favoritism. Voice note: scandal leads to affair allegations. Kellerman merger in jeopardy. As lead strategist's credentials questioned. Each one was a knife twisting deeper. When they landed, a car was waiting. It drove them directly to the Blackthorne and Vale building, past the protesters who'd somehow already gathered with signs, past the reporters shouting questions, through the lobby where employees stopped and stared, up to the 48th floor. The board was already assembled in the main conference room. 8 senior partners sitting around the table with expressions ranging from concerned to hostile. Jennifer Chen stood in the corner with a laptop, her face carefully blank. Damien walked in first. Ava followed, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Gentlemen, Damien said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Thank you for coming on short notice. Richard Blackthorne, the other founding partner, semi-retired now but still wielding considerable power, leaned back in his chair. I assume you've seen the article. I have. And it's partially true. Damien's voice was calm, level. Ava and I are involved. But the timeline in the article is wrong. The relationship began last night. 3 days ago, when I assigned her to the Kellerman project, there was nothing between us except professional respect. Can you prove that? This from Wilson, the VP who'd always hated Ava. Can you prove otherwise? Damien's eyes were ice. Because if you're going to question Miss Mercer's credentials based on a leaked story from an anonymous source, you'd better have evidence, real evidence, not gossip. Damien, Richard started. No. Damien cut him off. Here's what's going to happen. I'm removing myself from direct supervision of the Kellerman project effective immediately. Ava will report to Richard for the duration. Every decision she makes will be scrutinized by an independent review board. Every promotion, every raise, every assignment, completely transparent. Ava felt her chest tighten. He was doing exactly what he'd promised, protecting her, even if it cost him. As for the relationship, Damien continued, it's disclosed as of now, fully documented. No secrets, no conflicts of interest, and if anyone in this firm, partner, associate, or otherwise, suggests that Ava Mercer earned her position through anything other than exceptional work, they'll deal with me personally. The room was silent. This is highly irregular, Wilson said finally. So was losing my brother and keeping this firm running through grief. Damien's voice was sharp enough to cut. So was watching half the senior partners embezzle funds during the 2021 crisis and looking the other way because we couldn't afford the scandal. So was promoting Richard's nephew despite his spectacular incompetence because we owed family favors. This firm has never been about regular, Wilson. It's been about results. You're saying Ms. Mercer gets results? I'm saying Ms. Mercer delivered a flawless presentation to the Kellerman board. I'm saying she's turned around a hostile merger in 72 hours. I'm saying she's the best strategist we have under 40, and if you can't see that, you're blind. Richard cleared his throat. This puts us in a difficult position. I know. If the relationship fails, then we handle it professionally, like adults. Damien's jaw was set. But I'm not walking away from this. From her. So you need to decide right now if you're going to support me or fight me, because I promise you, you don't want to fight me. The partners exchanged glances, uncomfortable, calculating, weighing options. Finally, Richard sighed. Fine, but the independent review board isn't optional, and if there's any hint of impropriety, there won't be. Then we have an understanding. Richard looked at Ava directly for the first time. Ms. Mercer, I hope you understand what you're walking into. I do, she said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. Good. He stood. Then let's get back to work. We have a merger to close. The meeting ended. The partners filed out, whispering among themselves. Jennifer gathered her things and left without a word. And then it was just Ava and Damien in the empty conference room with the Manhattan skyline glowing outside the windows. That was... Ava started. The easy part, Damien finished. He loosened his tie. The hard part starts now. What's the hard part? He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Surviving what comes next. And as if on cue, both their phones buzzed simultaneously. Another article. Another headline. Kellerman Board votes to suspend merger pending review of consulting firm. Ava felt the blood drain from her face. No. Fuck! Damien was already dialing. Fuck, fuck, fuck. But before he could make the call, his phone rang. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, and his expression went cold. Understood, he said flatly. He hung up. What? Ava's voice came out barely above a whisper. Damien looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something that looked like defeat. That was Henderson, the Kellerman board. They're pulling out. His voice was hollow. Effective immediately. The merger is dead, and they're suing us for breach of professional conduct. The world tilted sideways. $1.3 billion. Gone. Because of her. Because she'd been stupid enough to fall for her boss. Because she'd been reckless enough to think she could have something for herself without consequences. This is my fault, she whispered. No. Yes. She was backing toward the door. This is entirely my fault, and now I've destroyed your firm and your reputation, and... Ava, stop! But she was already running, out of the conference room, past the cubicles, into the stairwell because she couldn't face the elevator. She made it 3 floors down before her legs gave out. She sat on the concrete stairs with her head in her hands and finally let herself break. The sobs came hard and ugly, 3 years of holding it together, 3 years of being strong and perfect and never showing weakness. All of it shattering. She'd gambled everything and lost. And the worst part, the absolutely worst part, was that even now, even sitting in a stairwell with her career in ruins and a billion-dollar merger destroyed, she couldn't regret last night. Couldn't regret Damien. Which meant she was either in love with him or completely insane. Probably both. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell. She looked up through blurred vision to see Damien standing there, breathing hard like he'd been running. Don't, she said. Please don't tell me it's going to be okay. Don't tell me we'll fix this. Don't. He sat down beside her on the cold concrete stairs. Said nothing. Just sat there while she cried. And somehow that was exactly what she needed. When the tears finally slowed, when her breathing evened out, when she felt slightly less like she was dying, Damien spoke. You asked me once what happened after my brother died, he said quietly. I told you I kept building, kept pushing, but I didn't tell you the whole truth. Ava wiped her eyes. What's the whole truth? The whole truth is that I wanted to quit. Every single day for a year I woke up and thought about walking away from the firm. From New York. from everything we'd built. Because without Marcus, none of it mattered. His voice was raw. But I didn't quit. You know why? She shook her head. Because I was terrified that if I stopped moving, I'd realize how alone I was, how empty my life had become, how much I'd sacrificed for success that didn't mean anything without someone to share it with. He looked at her. And then 14 months ago, I watched you stand in a boardroom and defend your work with more courage than I'd seen in years, and I realized something. What? That I'd been surviving, but I wasn't living. His hand found hers on the cold concrete. Until you. Ava's throat was tight. Damien, I know we just lost the biggest account this firm has ever handled. I know my reputation is probably destroyed. I know this is a disaster. His grip tightened. But I would make the same choice again. Every time. Because for the first time in 5 years, I remember what it feels like to want something beyond work. To want someone beyond what they can do for my career. They're going to destroy us. Probably. We might both lose everything. I know. And you're okay with that? Damien pulled her closer until her head was resting against his shoulder. I've already lost everything once. It nearly killed me. But losing you, his voice cracked, that would finish the job. They sat there in the stairwell for a long time. Two people who'd just blown up their lives, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things left in a collapsing world. Finally, Ava spoke. What do we do now? Now? Damien stood and held out his hand. Now we fight like hell. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. And somewhere between the 45th floor and the 48th, Ava Mercer made a choice. She could run, could quit, could salvage what was left of her reputation by throwing Damien under the bus and claiming she'd been coerced. Or she could stay, could fight, could prove that she'd earned every achievement on her own merit, regardless of who she loved. It wasn't a hard choice. When they walked back onto the executive floor together, hand in hand, every head turned. Let them stare. Let them whisper. Let them judge. Because Ava Mercer had spent her entire life trying to be perfect for other people, and she was done. The war room on the 48th floor had been commandeered at 11 p.m. Coffee cups littered the conference table. Whiteboards covered every wall with timelines and strategies and legal contingencies. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered like broken glass under a black sky. Ava stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, exhaustion making her movements sharp and mechanical. She'd been awake for 19 hours. Her eyes burned, her head pounded. But she couldn't stop. If we can prove the leak came from inside Kellerman's organization, she said, circling a name on the board, we can argue they manufactured the scandal to get out of the merger. Breach of good faith negotiation. Damien sat at the table with his laptop, tie discarded hours ago, sleeves rolled up. Henderson's too smart for that. He'll have covered his tracks. Then we find someone who isn't smart. Someone who made a mistake. She turned to face him. There's always a mistake. Richard Blackthorne stood by the windows, arms crossed, watching them work with an expression Ava couldn't read. He'd been there for 3 hours, mostly silent, occasionally interjecting with questions that felt more like tests than genuine curiosity. You're assuming the leak came from Kellerman, Richard said now. What if it came from inside the firm? The room went cold. Ava's hand froze on the whiteboard. What? The article had details only someone with internal access would know. Your work schedule, the Chicago trip, the hotel. Richard turned from the window. Someone here wanted this merger to fail. Damien's expression went dangerously blank. You're suggesting one of our own people sabotaged us? I'm suggesting we consider all possibilities. Who would benefit from destroying a billion-dollar account? Someone who wanted you to fail. Richard's voice was measured, careful. Someone who's been waiting for an opportunity to undermine your leadership. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Ava felt sick. She'd been so focused on external threats, on Henderson and the Kellerman board, that she hadn't considered the enemy might be closer, might be sitting in the cubicles outside this conference room, might be someone she'd worked beside for 3 years. Wilson, Damien said flatly. Richard nodded. He's been campaigning for managing partner since Marcus died. He thinks you're reckless, that the firm would be better off with more conservative leadership. So he destroys our biggest account to prove a point? or to create a crisis that forces a leadership change. Richard moved to the table and sat down. The board is already questioning your judgment. If this gets worse, if more details leak, if clients start pulling out, they'll have grounds to remove you. Ava's mind was racing. Wilson had always been hostile to her, always questioned her work, always made snide comments about young strategists who didn't understand how real business worked. She'd assumed it was garden-variety sexism and jealousy. But what if it was strategic? What if he'd been waiting for an opportunity to take down both her and Damien in one move? "We need proof," she said. "Proof of what?" Richard looked at her. "That he leaked to Business Insider? Good luck. These things are always anonymous, always untraceable." "Nothing's untraceable." Ava was already pulling out her phone. "Jennifer has access to all the email servers. If Wilson sent information out, there'll be a record." "Jennifer reports to Damien," Richard pointed out. "Any evidence she finds will be considered biased. Then we get someone neutral." Damien was typing on his laptop now, his expression focused and cold. "I'll call in a forensic IT specialist, former FBI. She owes me a favor." "That'll take days." "Then we work fast." Damien looked up. "Richard, I need you to keep the board calm. Tell them we're investigating. Tell them we have a strategy. Just buy us time." Richard stood slowly. "And if the investigation proves Wilson leaked, then I destroy him." Damien's voice was ice. "Professionally, publicly, completely." Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Approval, maybe, or warning, before he nodded and left. The door closed. Silence settled over the conference room like a weight. Ava sank into a chair. Her hands were shaking from too much caffeine and too little sleep. This is insane. This is corporate warfare. Damien closed his laptop. The merger was just the opening move. Now they're coming for everything. Who's they? Everyone who wants me gone. Everyone who thinks I'm too young or too aggressive or too damaged to run this firm. He rubbed his eyes. I've made a lot of enemies, Ava. I knew eventually they'd find a way to use it against me. I just didn't think they'd use you as the weapon. The words hit like a slap. Is that what I am? A weapon? No? He looked at her. You're the person I was stupid enough to let matter. Ava didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process the fact that their relationship, the thing that had felt so right just hours ago, was now being weaponized by people who wanted to tear them both apart. Her phone buzzed. A text from Riley. Riley. I'm outside. Let me in. You need sleep. Ava can't. Working. Riley. Ava. You've been at the office for 19 hours. You're going to collapse. Riley. Also, there are reporters camped outside your apartment building, so you can't go home anyway. Riley. Come to mine, please. Ava closed her eyes. The thought of reporters outside her apartment made her stomach turn, made everything feel too real, too invasive. Go, Damien said quietly. She looked up. What? Your friend is right. You need sleep, real sleep, not passing out on a conference room couch. He was already texting someone. I'll have a car take you to her place. Back entrance. No reporters. I can't just leave. Yes, you can. His voice was firm. The IT specialist won't have anything until morning. We're at a standstill until then, and you're no good to me if you're running on fumes. What about you? I'll be fine. Damien, go, Ava. He wasn't looking at her now. Was staring at his laptop screen like it held answers she couldn't see. Please. There was something in his voice that made her chest tighten, something exhausted and desperate and barely holding together. She wanted to stay, wanted to fight beside him, wanted to prove she wasn't going to abandon him when things got hard. But her body was shutting down. Her brain was fuzzing at the edges. And Riley was right. She was going to collapse if she didn't rest. Okay, she said finally, but call me if anything changes. I will. She gathered her things and walked to the door, turned back one last time to see Damien sitting alone in the conference room, surrounded by coffee cups and evidence of a battle they were losing. We're going to survive this, she said. Not a question, a statement, a promise. Damien looked at her with eyes so tired they were almost gray. I hope you're right. The car was waiting in the underground garage. Black sedan, tinted windows, driver who didn't ask questions. Ava climbed in the back and leaned her head against the leather seat, watching the city blur past. Riley's apartment was in Brooklyn, a fourth-floor walk-up in Park Slope that smelled like coffee and old books. Riley opened the door before Ava could knock, pulled her inside, and wrapped her in a hug that felt like coming home. "Jesus Christ," Riley muttered into her shoulder. "You look like death." "Feel like it too." Riley pulled back and studied her face. "When's the last time you ate?" "I don't know. This morning? Maybe yesterday morning." "Shower first, then food. Then you're going to tell me everything that's happened in the last 48 hours, because the news is saying some absolutely insane shit, and I need to hear it from you." Ava showered in Riley's tiny bathroom, letting the hot water strip away the grime and exhaustion and fear. When she emerged in borrowed sweatpants and a Columbia t-shirt, Riley had set out a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. They ate in silence for a while. Then Riley spoke. "So, you're sleeping with Damien Vale." Ava nearly choked on her eggs. "That's what you lead with?" "Well, it's buried in paragraph 3 of the Business Insider article, but yeah, seems like the most relevant detail." Riley leaned back in her chair. "How long?" "One night." Riley's eyebrows shot up. "One night, and they're already calling it an affair? One night that apparently destroyed a billion-dollar merger and possibly his entire firm." Ava pushed her plate away. "And now someone's actively trying to sabotage us from the inside, and I don't know if we can stop it." "Who?" "We think Wilson, senior partner, has it out for Damien." She rubbed her temples. "We're investigating, but it might be too late. The damage is done. Kellerman pulled out. Other clients are probably going to follow, and everyone at the firm is looking at me like I'm the whore who ruined everything." "Did anyone actually say that to your face?" "They don't have to. I can see it in their eyes." Ava's voice cracked. "And the worst part is, I can't even defend myself. Because technically I did sleep with my boss. Technically the optics are terrible. Technically, I'm everything they're accusing me of being. Except you're not." Riley reached across the table and grabbed her hand. "You earned that position. You're brilliant. You've been carrying half the strategic work at that firm for years, while assholes like Brian took credit, so they can shove their optics up their judgmental asses." Despite everything, Ava smiled. "Thanks. I'm serious. Damien Vale didn't promote you because you're pretty. He promoted you because you're scary good at your job. And if he fell for you along the way, that's not a crime. That's just being human. Tell that to the board." "I will if you want me to." Riley squeezed her hand. "But first you need to answer one question honestly. Do you love him?" The question hung in the air like a dare. Ava opened her mouth, closed it, tried to think of an answer that wouldn't make her sound insane. "I don't know," she said finally. It's only been... One night doesn't mean shit. You've been working with him for 3 years. You've been circling each other for months. So I'll ask again. Do you love him?" Ava closed her eyes. Saw Damien sitting in the conference room looking exhausted and defeated. Saw the way he defended her to the board. Saw the vulnerability in his eyes when he'd said, "I would make the same choice again." "Yes," she whispered. "I think I do." "Then fight for him." "I am fighting." "No. You're fighting for your career, for your reputation, for all the external shit that doesn't actually matter." Riley's voice was sharp. "I'm saying fight for him, for what you have together, for the thing that's worth destroying your career over." "Riley, because here's what I know about you, Ava Mercer. You've spent your entire life being practical, being smart, being the good daughter who makes everyone proud. And the one fucking time you do something reckless and messy and real, everyone wants to punish you for it." She leaned forward. "Don't let them. Don't let them make you regret being human." Tears were burning behind Ava's eyes again. She was so tired of crying, so tired of feeling like she was one wrong move away from complete collapse. "What if we can't fix this?" she whispered. "Then you walk away with your head held high and you start over somewhere else. But you don't apologize for loving someone. You don't let them turn this into something dirty or shameful. And you sure as hell don't give Wilson or Henderson or any of those corporate vultures the satisfaction of watching you break." Ava nodded, throat too tight to speak. She slept in Riley's guest room, a tiny space barely big enough for a twin bed, and woke up to her phone ringing at 6 a.m. Jennifer Chen's name flashed across the screen. Ava's stomach dropped. Jennifer never called. Never. Everything was always carefully scheduled emails and calendar invitations. Jennifer? Ms. Mercer? Jennifer's voice was strained, wrong. You need to get to the office, now. What happened? Just, please come. Damien asked me to call you. He said to come to his office immediately. The line went dead. Ava was out of bed and pulling on yesterday's clothes before the panic fully hit. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Riley drove her into Manhattan, running red lights and weaving through traffic while Ava tried to call Damien. Straight to voicemail. She tried again and again. Nothing. They pulled up outside the Blackthorn and Vale building at 6:45. Morning light was just starting to break over the city. The lobby was nearly empty. Ava ran to the elevators, slammed her hand against the button. The weight felt eternal. Floor by floor, rising, rising. The doors opened onto the 48th floor, and Ava's entire world shattered. Police, everywhere. 2 uniformed officers standing by the elevators. Plainclothes detectives moving through the offices with evidence bags. Yellow crime scene tape blocking off the executive suite. Jennifer stood near her desk, arms wrapped around herself, eyes red like she'd been crying. What the hell is going on? Ava demanded. Jennifer looked at her with an expression that was equal parts pity and horror. They arrested him. The words didn't make sense. Who? Damien. Jennifer's voice broke. They arrested Damien. The floor tilted. Ava grabbed the wall to keep from falling. For what? Insider trading, securities fraud. They're saying he's been manipulating stock prices on merger deals for the past 2 years. That he used confidential client information to make trades through offshore accounts. Jennifer was shaking now. The FBI showed up an hour ago with a warrant. They took everything. His computers, his files, his phone. And then they put him in handcuffs and she couldn't finish. Ava couldn't breathe, couldn't process, couldn't understand how this was happening. Insider trading, securities fraud. These weren't accusations you made lightly. These were federal crimes, prison time, complete destruction. Where's he now? Federal custody, downtown. Jennifer wiped her eyes. His lawyer is there, but they're saying bail will be at least $5 million, maybe more. Who's saying? Who brought the charges? The SEC, based on an anonymous tip. Jennifer's jaw clenched. A tip that included detailed transaction records and offshore account information. Someone handed them everything they needed to build a case. Understanding hit Ava like ice water. Wilson. This wasn't just sabotaging the merger. This was complete annihilation. This was taking down Damien so thoroughly that he'd never recover, never work again, never threaten Wilson's path to managing partner. I need to see him, Ava said. They won't let you. Family and legal counsel only. Jennifer pulled out a business card. This is his lawyer, Martin Reeves. He said to give you this number. Said Damien wanted you to have it. Ava took the card with shaking hands, stared at the embossed name and number like they might hold answers. Behind her, one of the detectives emerged from Damien's office carrying a box of files. She watched him walk past, this stranger dismantling the life Damien had built, and felt rage boiling up through the shock. This is bullshit, she said. Her voice was too loud in the corporate quiet. Damien would never, he wouldn't. Ms. Mercer. One of the plainclothes detectives approached. Mid-40s, sharp suit, badge clipped to his belt. I'm Detective Morris. I need to ask you some questions. About what? About your relationship with Damien Vale, about the Kellerman merger, about whether you had knowledge of any improper trading activity. The words were carefully neutral, but the implication was clear. They thought she was involved, thought she might be an accomplice. I want a lawyer, Ava said. That's your right. But I should tell you, cooperation now could make a significant difference in how the investigation proceeds. If you were coerced or misled, I wasn't coerced. I wasn't misled. And I'm not answering questions without legal representation. Her hands were clenched so tight her nails cut into her palms. Am I under arrest? Not at this time. Then I'm leaving. She turned and walked to the elevator before he could stop her, jabbed the button with trembling fingers. The doors opened immediately, small mercy, and she stepped inside. As the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of the 48th floor, the police, the evidence bags. Jennifer standing alone by her desk, looking lost, the life they'd built together disappearing into federal custody. Ava rode down in silence, walked through the lobby, emerged onto 6th Avenue, where morning commuters were starting to flood the sidewalks. Riley was waiting by the car, eyes wide. What happened? They arrested him. Ava's voice sounded dead even to her own ears. Insider trading? The FBI? He's in federal custody, and I can't see him, and they think I'm involved in Her legs gave out. Riley caught her before she hit the pavement, held her up, guided her into the car. We need to call someone, Riley was saying. A lawyer. Your father. Someone who can help. There's no one. Ava was shaking now, full-body tremors she couldn't control. Don't you understand? This is it. They've destroyed him, completely, and everyone's going to think I was part of it, that I knew, that I helped. Did you? The question was soft, but it cut like a knife. Ava looked at her best friend with eyes that felt like they belonged to a stranger. No, I didn't even know there was anything to know about. But no one's going to believe that. They're going to think I seduced him to get access, that I manipulated him, that the whole relationship was a con. Then we prove it wasn't. How? The laugh that came out of her was slightly hysterical. How do we prove something that everyone wants to believe is true? Riley didn't have an answer. They sat in the car while morning turned into afternoon, while Riley made phone calls and Ava stared at nothing. While the news broke and her phone exploded with messages from reporters and former colleagues and people she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanting statements. She turned off her phone. At 2 p.m., Martin Reeves called Riley's cell. Ava took the call on speaker. Ms. Mercer. The lawyer's voice was professionally calm. I'm calling on behalf of Damien Vale. Is he okay? He's in custody. They've denied bail pending further investigation. The charges are serious, multiple counts of securities fraud, insider trading, wire fraud. If convicted, he's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. The number hit like a physical blow. 20 years. Damien would be in his 60s when he got out. His firm would be gone. His reputation destroyed. His entire life erased. What can I do? Ava asked. Right now? Nothing. The evidence is substantial. Transaction records, offshore accounts in shell company names, email communications that suggest premeditation. Reeves paused. I'm going to be honest with you, Ms. Mercer. This case was built carefully. Whoever tipped off the SEC gave them everything they needed. This wasn't a fishing expedition. This was surgical. Wilson, Ava said, we believe so, but we can't prove it. And frankly, even if we could, it doesn't change the underlying charges. The evidence exists. The trades happened. We have to deal with that reality. Damien didn't do this. Perhaps, but the government has documentation that says otherwise. And in federal court, documentation beats character testimony every time. Another pause. Damien asked me to tell you something. Ava's throat closed. What? He said to walk away. End the relationship publicly. Cooperate with investigators. Protect your career. Reeves's voice softened slightly. He said to tell you that he's sorry, that this wasn't supposed to happen, that you deserve better than to be dragged down with him. Tears were streaming down Ava's face now, silent, hot, endless. Can I see him? She whispered. She teethed. Not for 72 hours. Maybe longer. The prosecutor is treating this as a high-profile white-collar case. They're being very careful about access. Tell him... She couldn't finish. Couldn't find words big enough for what she was feeling. I'll tell him you called, Reeves said gently. Then he hung up. Ava sat in Riley's car with tears running down her face and her entire world collapsing around her. The man she loved was in federal custody facing 20 years in prison. The firm was imploding. Her career was over. And everyone was going to think she was complicit. What do you want to do? Riley asked quietly. Ava wiped her eyes, took a shaking breath. What did she want to do? She wanted to run, wanted to get on a plane to anywhere else and start over with a new name and a new life. Wanted to erase the last week like it never happened. But that wasn't who she was. She pulled out her phone and turned it back on, ignored the flood of messages, opened her contacts and called a number she'd been given 2 days ago. Richard Blackthorne answered on the second ring. Miss Mercer, I need to see you. Today. Now. Her voice was steady, cold. We need to talk about Wilson. There was a long pause, then, my office, 4 p.m. He hung up. Ava looked at Riley. Take me back. Back where? To the firm. I'm not done fighting. Riley stared at her. Ava, they'll eat you alive. Let them try. She was already checking her reflection in the phone camera, wiping away tears, straightening her wrinkled shirt, putting on the armor she'd worn for 3 years. Damien told me to walk away, to protect myself. So why aren't you? Because walking away means letting Wilson win, means letting them destroy Damien without a fight, means proving everyone right who said I was only in this for myself. She met Riley's eyes. And I'm done being what other people expect me to be. Riley looked at her for a long moment, then she started the car. You're either incredibly brave or completely insane. Probably both. They drove back into Manhattan, back to the building where Ava had spent 3 years building a career that was now in ruins. Back to the battlefield. The 48th floor was chaos. Associates whispered in clusters. Partners held emergency meetings behind closed doors. The police were gone, but their presence lingered like smoke. Richard's office was in the opposite corner from Damien's, smaller, darker, filled with antique furniture and old law books. He sat behind his desk when Ava walked in, looking older than she remembered. Close the door, he said. She did. I assume you've heard about the charges. I was there when they arrested him. Ava sat down without being invited. And I know Wilson set this up. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, the leak to Business Insider, the anonymous tip to the SEC, the perfectly timed destruction of the Kellerman merger. She leaned forward. Wilson has been trying to take down Damien for years. This was his move, his endgame. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a folder, set it on the desk between them. What's that? Ava asked. Evidence? Richard's voice was carefully neutral. The IT specialist Damien hired finished her investigation this morning, before the FBI showed up. Ava's heart was pounding. And she found emails sent from Wilson's personal account to several journalists, including the reporter who wrote the Business Insider article. He pushed the folder toward her. He leaked everything, the voice note, the relationship, the Chicago trip, all of it. Triumph surged through Ava's chest. Then we have him. We can prove he leaked gossip to the press, which is unethical but not illegal. Richard's expression was grim. What we can't prove is that he tipped off the SEC because that communication was too careful, too clean, probably done through an intermediary or anonymous channel. And even if we could prove it, Miss Mercer, it doesn't matter. Richard leaned back in his chair. Because the charges against Damien are real. The offshore accounts exist. The trades happened. Wilson may have exposed it, but he didn't create it. The words landed like stones. You think Damien's guilty, Ava said slowly. I think the evidence is substantial. I think the government doesn't bring charges like this without being certain they can win. And I think you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the man you fell in love with has been lying to you from the beginning. No. The word came out sharp, defensive. Damien wouldn't what? Break the law? Manipulate markets? Use insider information to make millions? Richard's voice was gentle but brutal. Miss Mercer, I've known Damien for 15 years. I watched him build this firm from nothing. I watched him work himself half to death after Marcus died. And I watched him become obsessed with success in ways that worried me. That doesn't mean... It means he was capable of anything to protect what he'd built, including things that crossed legal lines. Richard opened another drawer and pulled out a second folder, this one thicker. I've been conducting my own investigation, quietly. These are transaction records going back 18 months. Trades made through shell companies that Damien controlled. Profits that match insider information from at least 6 different mergers. He slid the folder across the desk. Ava stared at it like it might explode. I don't believe you. Then look, see for yourself. Richard's voice was sad now, pitying. I liked Damien, respected him, but the evidence doesn't lie, and you need to decide right now if you're going to go down with him or save yourself while you still can. Ava's hands were shaking as she reached for the folder, opened it, saw pages and pages of financial records, transaction dates, account numbers, amounts that made her stomach turn. And there, in the digital signature of the account holder, was a name she recognized: DV Holdings, LLC, Damian Vale's initials. The room was spinning. Ava flipped through more pages, saw more trades, more profits, more evidence that built a picture she didn't want to see. "This can't be real," she whispered. "I'm sorry." And Richard did sound sorry. "But you need to make a choice. Today. Right now. Either you cooperate with the investigation, testify that you had no knowledge of the illegal activity, or you become a target yourself. I won't testify against him. Then you'll be charged as an accomplice. They'll freeze your assets, destroy your career, possibly send you to prison." Richard leaned forward. "Is that really what you want? To throw away your entire life for a man who was using you from the beginning?" "He wasn't using me, wasn't he?" Richard's voice was sharp now. "Think about it. He promoted you right after that voice note went viral, kept you close during the most sensitive merger of his career, made you dependent on him professionally and emotionally, and all the while he was committing federal crimes that would eventually require a scapegoat." The words were poison, seeping into Ava's brain, making her question everything. Had Damian really fallen for her? Or had she been a convenient tool? A young strategist he could manipulate and control? Someone to take the fall if things went wrong? No. She knew him, knew the vulnerability in his eyes when he talked about his brother, knew the way he'd defended her to the board. Knew, but did she really know him? Or did she know the version of himself he'd chosen to show her? "I need to think," she said. "You have 24 hours. Richard stood. "After that, the prosecutor is filing additional charges, and you'll be named in them unless you cooperate." Ava grabbed the folders and left the office, walked through the floor in a daze, made it to the elevators, rode down alone. Outside, the sun was setting. The city was bathed in orange light that felt wrong, too beautiful for how ugly everything had become. Riley was still waiting by the car. She took one look at Ava's face and said, "What happened?" "I don't know." Ava's voice sounded distant, disconnected. "I don't know anything anymore." She got in the car, let Riley drive, stared at the folders in her lap like they were bombs that might detonate. When they got back to Riley's apartment, Ava spread the documents across the kitchen table, spent hours going through every page, every transaction, every piece of evidence that said Damian Vale was guilty. And with each page, something inside her chest cracked a little more. By midnight, Riley had fallen asleep on the couch. Ava sat alone at the table, surrounded by proof of betrayal, and tried to figure out what she believed. She believed Damian had been grieving, believed he'd been desperate to save the firm his brother died for, believed he'd been capable of love despite spending 5 years building walls. But she also believed Richard wouldn't lie, wouldn't fabricate evidence, wouldn't destroy a friend without being certain. So where did that leave her? In love with a man who might be a criminal, facing prison time for crimes she didn't commit, forced to choose between loyalty and survival. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Unknown. "This is Martin Reeves. Damian wanted me to pass along a message." Ava's hands shook as she opened the next text. Unknown. "He said to tell you he loves you, that he's sorry, that you should testify against him and save yourself, that he never meant for any of this to touch you." Unknown. "He also said that whatever you decide, he understands, and that meeting you was the only thing he doesn't regret." Tears blurred Ava's vision. She typed back with trembling fingers. "Ava, tell him I need to know the truth. Did he do it? Did he commit insider trading?" The response took 5 minutes, long enough that Ava thought maybe Reeves wouldn't answer, or maybe Damian had refused to respond. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown. "He says yes. He did it. And he's sorry you got caught in the fallout." The phone slipped from Ava's hand and clattered onto the table. He'd admitted it. Damian Vale, the man she'd destroyed her career for, the man she'd fallen in love with despite every logical reason not to, had just confessed to federal crimes. And he'd asked her to save herself by testifying against him. Ava sat in Riley's kitchen with evidence of betrayal spread across the table and a confession burning in her phone, and for the first time in her life, she had absolutely no idea what to do. The man she loved was guilty. Her career was destroyed. Her reputation was in ruins, and she had 24 hours to decide whether to save herself by destroying him or go down fighting for someone who might not deserve her loyalty. Outside the window, New York City glittered in the darkness. Millions of people living their lives, moving forward, surviving. And Ava Mercer sat frozen in the wreckage of her own choices, unable to move in any direction without losing everything that mattered. The clock on the wall ticked toward tomorrow, toward the deadline, toward the moment she'd have to become someone she didn't recognize just to survive. And somewhere in federal custody, Damian Vale sat in a cell thinking about the woman he'd loved and destroyed in equal measure, wondering if she'd ever forgive him for being human enough to fall and broken enough to take her down with him. The night stretched on, and morning came too fast, carrying with it decisions that would change everything. But that reckoning was still hours away. For now, Ava just sat in the darkness and tried to remember who she'd been before a voice note sent to the wrong number had started this entire catastrophe. Tried to remember if that person still existed, or if she'd been destroyed along with everything else. Ava didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. She sat at Riley's kitchen table until the sky turned from black to gray to the pale blue of dawn, staring at the folders that held evidence of Damian's guilt. Her phone sat beside them, Reeves's text still glowing on the screen. He says yes. He did it. 3 words that shattered everything. At 6 a.m., Riley emerged from the bedroom, took one look at Ava's face, and put on coffee without speaking. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions, heavy with the weight of a decision that would define everything that came after. "You have to testify," Riley said finally, setting a mug in front of Ava. "You know that, right?" Ava wrapped her hands around the hot ceramic but didn't drink. "Do I?" He confessed. He committed federal crimes. He's guilty. Riley sat down across from her. "And if you don't cooperate, they'll destroy you too. Is that what you want? Prison? Your name dragged through every news outlet as his accomplice?" "No." "Then the choice is simple." But it wasn't simple. Nothing about this was simple. Ava looked at her best friend with eyes that burned from exhaustion and tears. "What if I don't care about saving myself?" "Then you're an idiot." Riley's voice was sharp, desperate. "Ava, I love you, but I'm not going to watch you throw your life away for a man who lied to you, who used you, who committed crimes that could send him to prison for 20 years. He didn't use me. How do you know? How can you possibly know that anything he told you was real?" Riley grabbed the folders and shook them. "This is real. These transactions are real. The offshore accounts are real. His confession is real. Everything else is just words." Ava's throat was tight. "He told me about his brother, about Marcus. That wasn't a lie." "Maybe not, but it also doesn't change what he did." Riley's expression softened. "I know you love him. I know this hurts, but love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's mistakes. And what if testifying against him is the mistake? Then you'll regret it, but at least you'll be alive and free to have regrets." Riley reached across the table and grabbed Ava's hand. "Please, I'm begging you. Cooperate with the prosecutor. Save yourself. Let Damian face the consequences of his own choices." Ava pulled her hand away and stood. Her body ached from sitting still for too long. Her head pounded with exhaustion and too much coffee and decisions that felt impossible. "I need to see him," she said. "They won't let you." "Then I'll make them." She was already grabbing her jacket. "I need to look him in the eye and hear him say it. I need—" "What? Permission to walk away?" Riley stood too. "Ava, he already gave you that. He told you to testify, to save yourself. What more do you need?" "The truth." Her voice cracked. "I need the whole truth. Not filtered through lawyers or evidence folders or text messages. I need to hear it from him." Riley looked at her for a long moment. Then she grabbed her keys. "Fine. But I'm driving. And if they arrest you on the spot, I'm saying I told you so." They drove into Manhattan through early morning traffic. The city was waking up, coffee shops opening, subway platforms filling, thousands of people starting their days completely unaware that Ava Mercer's life was disintegrating with every passing minute. The Federal Detention Center was downtown, a brutalist concrete building that looked exactly like what it was. A place where people went to have their freedom stripped away. Ava walked through the metal detectors with her heart hammering, filled out paperwork, and waited in a sterile room that smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. Ms. Mercer, a corrections officer, appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry, but you're not on the approved visitor list. I need to see Damien Vale. It's urgent. Family and legal counsel only. That's federal policy." "I'm his—" She stopped. What was she? His girlfriend? His employee? His accomplice? "I need to see him, please." The officer's expression was sympathetic but unmoved. "I understand, but I can't bend the rules. You'll need to contact his attorney and request to be added to the approved list. That process takes 48 to 72 hours. Ava felt something snap inside her chest. "I don't have 72 hours. I have until noon today before the prosecutor files additional charges, before I become a target of this investigation. And I need to hear from Damien's own mouth whether he's guilty before I decide whether to destroy him or destroy myself." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, please." The word came out broken. "Please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes to look him in the eye." The officer looked at her for a long moment, saw something in her face. Desperation, maybe? Or the kind of exhaustion that came from being pushed past every breaking point. Then he sighed. "Wait here." He disappeared. Ava stood in the sterile room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and her entire future balanced on whether this man would show mercy. 10 minutes passed. 15. 20. Then the door opened. 5 minutes, the officer said. "That's all I can give you, and this conversation didn't happen. Understood?" Understood? He led her through a series of locked doors, each one clanging shut behind them with a finality that made her stomach turn. Through corridors painted institutional green, past cells where she could hear voices and movement but couldn't see faces. Finally, they reached a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. A single window made of reinforced glass looked out at a concrete wall. "Sit, he'll be here in a minute." The officer left. The door locked behind him. Ava sat in the cold metal chair and tried to steady her breathing. Tried to prepare for seeing Damien in an orange jumpsuit with his freedom and his dignity stripped away. Tried to figure out what she would say, what she would ask, what answer would let her walk out of here with any clarity at all. The door opened. Damien walked in flanked by a guard, and Ava felt her breath catch. He looked destroyed, hair unwashed, face unshaven, dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd slept about as much as she had. The orange jumpsuit hung on his frame like he'd already lost weight. But his eyes were still sharp and dark and full of something that might have been relief when he saw her. "Ava." Her name came out rough, like he'd been screaming or crying or both. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you." The guard unlocked his handcuffs and stepped back to the corner of the room, close enough to intervene, far enough to give them the illusion of privacy. Damien sat down across from her. His hands were shaking slightly as he placed them flat on the metal table. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Could see the man who'd built an empire reduced to this, a prisoner in federal custody waiting for his life to be dismantled piece by piece. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "It's not safe. If they see you visiting me, it'll make you look complicit. I don't care how it looks." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. No lawyers, no filters, just you and me and the truth." Damien closed his eyes like he was in pain. "Ava, did you do it?" The question exploded out of her. "Did you commit insider trading? Did you manipulate stock prices? Did you break the law?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Damien opened his eyes, they were full of something that looked like grief. "Yes." The word hit like a physical blow. Even though Ava had known, even though she'd read the evidence and seen the confession, hearing it directly from him made it real in a way nothing else had. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why would you risk everything? The firm, your reputation, your freedom. Why?" "Because I was desperate." He leaned forward, hands still flat on the table like he needed something solid to anchor him. After Marcus died, the firm almost collapsed. Clients pulled out. Partners wanted to sell. Everything we'd built was falling apart. And I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let his dream die with him. So you committed federal crimes? So I found a way to stay afloat. His jaw clenched. It started small. One trade, using information from a merger we were consulting on, made $50,000, enough to cover payroll that month. And I told myself it was temporary, that once we stabilized, I'd stop. But you didn't stop. No, because there was always another crisis, always another month where we were barely holding on, and the trades kept working, kept generating income, kept the firm alive. He laughed bitterly. By the time I realized how deep I was in, it was too late. The offshore accounts were established, the pattern was set, and stopping would have meant admitting what I'd done. Ava felt sick. How long? 18 months. Maybe longer. He stopped, took a shaking breath. I didn't keep close track. That was part of the problem. I compartmentalized it, told myself it wasn't real as long as I didn't look too closely. And me? The question came out barely above a whisper. Where do I fit into this? Damien's expression crumbled. You don't. You were never supposed to be part of any of this. But I am. Because you promoted me. Because you made me lead strategist on the Kellerman merger. Because you... Her voice broke. Because you made me fall in love with you while you were committing crimes that would destroy us both. I know. Tears were sliding down his face now. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. You were supposed to be separate. You were supposed to be the one good thing in my life that wasn't tainted by all the ways I'd failed. And instead I dragged you into the mess and ruined you along with everything else. Did you love me? Ava needed to know. Needed to understand if anything between them had been real. Or was I just convenient, a distraction, a potential scapegoat if things went wrong? I loved you. The words came out fierce, desperate. I love you. That's the one thing I didn't lie about. From the moment you stood in that boardroom and defended the Redstone strategy, I was gone. And every day after that was me trying not to feel it, trying to maintain distance, trying to protect you from me. You didn't protect me. You destroyed me. I know. His hands clenched into fists on the table. That's why I'm telling you to walk away. Testify against me. Tell the prosecutor everything. Save yourself while you still can. What if I don't want to be saved? Damien's eyes went wide. What? What if I don't want to testify? What if I don't want to cooperate with an investigation designed to destroy you? Ava leaned forward until they were inches apart. What if I'm willing to fight for you anyway? No. The word came out harsh. Final. Absolutely not. I won't let you throw your life away for my mistakes. It's not your choice. Yes, it is, because I'm the one who committed the crimes. I'm the one who deserves to go to prison, not you, never you. His voice broke. Please, Ava. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Just testify. Save yourself. Let me face this alone. Why? Tears were streaming down her face now. Why do you get to decide? Why do you get to be the martyr while I'm supposed to just walk away and pretend none of this mattered? Because you have a future, he was shouting now, the guard taking a step forward before stopping. Damien's voice dropped to something raw and broken. You're 32 years old. You're brilliant. You're capable of so much more than this disaster, and I will not be the reason you end up in prison or unemployable or destroyed. I won't do that to you. Then you shouldn't have made me fall in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Final, devastating, true. Damien reached across the table like he wanted to touch her, but stopped himself. His hand hovered in the space between them, close enough to bridge the distance, far enough to maintain the boundary. If you love me, he said quietly, you'll walk away. You'll testify. You'll save yourself. That's what I need from you. That's the only thing I'm asking for. Ava looked at his hand suspended between them, looked at his face, ravaged by exhaustion and guilt and love, looked at the man who'd confessed to federal crimes and was still trying to protect her from the consequences. And she made a choice. She stood up. Time's up, the guard said from the corner. Ava looked at Damien one last time, memorized his face in case this was the last moment she ever saw him free, memorized the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing that mattered even as his world collapsed. "I'm not going to testify," she said. "Ava, but I'm not going down with you either." Her voice was steady now, cold. "I'm going to find out who really leaked to the SEC. I'm going to find out if Wilson acted alone or if there's more to this story. And I'm going to make sure that if you go to prison, it's because you're actually guilty, not because someone set you up. There's no setup. I did this, maybe, but maybe not all of it. Maybe some of those trades weren't yours. Maybe someone else used your accounts. Maybe the evidence isn't as clean as it looks." She was backing toward the door now. "I have 12 hours before my deadline. I'm going to use them." "Ava, stop. You're going to get yourself arrested. Then I'll get arrested. But at least I'll go down fighting instead of running away like you want me to." She reached for the door handle. "I love you, Damien. Which means I'm not giving up on you, even if you've given up on yourself." The guard opened the door. Ava walked through without looking back. Behind her, she heard Damien shout her name, heard the desperation in his voice, heard him trying to stand up before the guard forced him back down. But she kept walking, through the locked doors, through the corridors, through the sterile waiting room, out into the morning sunlight that felt too bright after the fluorescent darkness of the detention center. Riley was waiting by the car. She took one look at Ava's face and said, "What are you going to do?" "Something stupid." Ava pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized 2 days ago. "And possibly illegal, and definitely career-ending. So basically a Tuesday for you at this point." Despite everything, Ava smiled. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Ms. Mercer." Richard Blackthorne's voice was carefully neutral. "I assume you're calling with your decision. I need to see Wilson, today, now." There was a pause. "I don't think that's wise." "I don't care what's wise. Wilson set this whole thing up. He leaked to Business Insider. He tipped off the SEC. And I'm willing to bet he manipulated evidence to make Damien look more guilty than he actually is." Her voice was steel. "So you're going to arrange a meeting, all three of us, conference room, 1 hour, or I'm going to walk into the prosecutor's office and tell them everything I know about Wilson's campaign to take down Damien, including his communications with journalists." Another pause, longer this time. "You're making a mistake." "Probably, but it's my mistake to make." She hung up before Richard could argue. Riley looked at her. "Please tell me you have a plan." "Not even a little bit." Ava was already walking to the car. "But I have 12 hours and nothing left to lose. That'll have to be enough." They drove back to Blackthorne and Vale through morning traffic that had thickened into gridlock. Ava used the time to go through the evidence folders again. This time not looking at what was there, but what wasn't. The gaps, the inconsistencies, the transactions that didn't quite fit the pattern. Because Damien was meticulous, obsessively careful with details. And some of these trades felt sloppy, rushed, wrong. What if someone had piggybacked on his crimes? What if Wilson had discovered the offshore accounts and added his own transactions? Used Damien's illegal activity as cover for his own? It was a long shot, a desperate theory born from too little sleep and too much desperation. But it was all Ava had. They reached the firm at 10 a.m. The 48th floor was crowded. Associates trying to work despite the chaos, partners holding whispered conversations in doorways, everyone watching everyone else with suspicion. Ava walked through it like she owned the place, like she hadn't been named in a federal investigation, like her career hadn't imploded 48 hours ago. Jennifer looked up from her desk as Ava approached. "Ms. Mercer, Mr. Blackthorne said you'd be coming. Conference room A. He and Mr. Wilson are waiting." "Thank you, Jennifer." "Ms. Mercer?" Jennifer's voice stopped her. "Whatever you're about to do, be careful. Wilson is dangerous when he's cornered." Ava met her eyes. Saw something like understanding there. Like maybe Jennifer knew more than she'd let on. "I know, but someone has to corner him." She walked to conference room A and pushed open the door without knocking. Richard sat at the head of the table, expression carefully neutral. And across from him, looking annoyed and slightly confused, was Wilson. Mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit, the face of a man who'd spent decades climbing corporate ladders and would do anything to reach the top. "Ms. Mercer," Wilson's voice was cold. "This is highly irregular. I'm told you demanded this meeting?" "I did." Ava closed the door behind her and sat down. set the evidence folders on the table. Because I know what you did, and we're going to talk about it. Wilson glanced at Richard. I don't know what she's talking about. Don't you? Ava opened the first folder. You leaked information to Business Insider. You tipped off the SEC about Damien's trades. You've been systematically destroying him for months, and I can prove it. That's a serious accusation with no evidence. The IT specialist Damien hired found your emails to journalists. We have documentation of every leak you made, every piece of gossip you spread, every lie you told to make it look like Damien was having an affair with me before the Kellerman project started. She pushed papers across the table. So let's stop pretending you're innocent. Wilson's jaw tightened. Leaking to the press isn't a crime. No, but tipping off the SEC with false information is. And I think you did more than just expose Damien's trades. I think you added to them. I think you used his offshore accounts to make your own illegal trades and buried them in his transaction history. That's absurd. Is it? Ava pulled out another document. This trade, December 14th, $300,000 profit on a merger that Blackthorne and Vail wasn't even consulting on. There's no way Damien would have had insider information about it. But you know who was on that board? Your brother-in-law. The room went silent. Wilson's face had gone pale. You can't prove that. Actually, I can, because the transaction came from DV Holdings, LLC, the shell company in Damien's name. But the timing is wrong. The trade was made at 2 a.m. Damien was in London that day. I checked the travel records. He was giving a presentation to a client at 9 a.m. London time, which means he was asleep at 2 a.m. New York time. But you know who was awake and in the office? You. She pushed more papers across the table. And this trade, and this one, all made at times when Damien was traveling or unavailable, all using information you had access to that he didn't. You piggybacked on his crimes, used his illegal activity as cover for your own. Wilson stood up abruptly. This is a witch hunt. I don't have to listen to this. Sit down! Richard's voice cut through the room like a blade. Now! Wilson looked at him. Richard, surely you don't believe... I believe Ms. Mercer has raised reasonable questions. Questions that deserve answers before we let federal prosecutors destroy what's left of this firm. Richard's expression was stone. So sit down and explain yourself, or I'll have security escort you out and inform the SEC that we suspect additional fraud. Wilson sank back into his chair. For the first time since Ava had known him, he looked rattled, uncertain. He stopped. Started again. I discovered Damien's offshore accounts by accident during an audit 6 months ago. And yes, I made a few trades, but only because the infrastructure was already there, only because Damien had already crossed every ethical line. How many trades? Ava's voice was cold. How many, Wilson? He was sweating now. 8, maybe 10. I didn't keep 10 trades that could add years to Damien's sentence. 10 trades that you let him take the fall for while you plotted to take his position. She leaned forward. You didn't just expose him. You framed him. You made him look worse than he was so the board would have no choice but to remove him as managing partner. He was guilty. He broke the law first. And you made it worse. You turned a desperate man's mistakes into something unforgivable. You destroyed $1 billion merger to create a crisis. You leaked personal information to humiliate him, all so you could step into his position when he fell. Ava's hands were shaking with rage. So don't pretend this was about ethics or doing the right thing. This was about power, and you were willing to destroy everyone in your path to get it. Wilson looked at Richard. Are you going to let her speak to me like this? I'm going to let her finish. Richard's voice was hard. Then you're going to tell me the truth. All of it. And we're going to decide together whether to bring this information to the federal prosecutor or handle it internally. You can't. I'm still a founding partner of this firm, which means I have considerable influence over what happens next. Richard leaned back in his chair. So start talking. How many trades did you make using Damien's accounts? What other evidence did you manipulate? And who else knew about your plan? Wilson looked between them, saw that he was trapped, saw that denial would only make it worse. 15 trades, he said finally. His voice was defeated. 15 trades over 6 months, total profit of about $2 million, deposited into a separate offshore account that I could access. And the SEC tip? Anonymous. Sent through an encrypted service. I gave them everything. Damien's account information, transaction records, evidence of his guilt. But I also included my own trades buried in his history. Made it look like one continuous pattern instead of two separate people. Jesus Christ, Richard's expression was disgusted. Do you have any idea what you've done? To Damien, to this firm, to everyone who works here. I did what was necessary. Wilson's voice gained strength. Damien was out of control, building a cult of personality, making reckless decisions. He needed to be stopped. So you decided to play judge and executioner? Ava's voice was shaking. You decided your crimes were justified because his came first? My crimes saved this firm from his incompetence. Your crimes sent an innocent man to prison. She was on her feet now, leaning across the table. Damien committed insider trading. He deserves to face consequences for that. But he doesn't deserve to face consequences for your trades too. And he sure as hell doesn't deserve to lose everything because you were too cowardly to challenge him directly. Miss Mercer, sit down. Richard's voice was calm but commanding. We need to think about this strategically. If we bring this information to the prosecutor, it could help Damien's case, but it also exposes the firm to additional liability. Every client we've ever had could sue. The SEC could expand their investigation. We could lose everything. So what are you suggesting? Ava's voice was ice. That we cover it up? Let Wilson get away with this so the firm survives? I'm suggesting we consider all options before we act rashly. Richard looked at Wilson with something like pity. You're done here. Effective immediately. You'll resign quietly. Sign whatever documents we need to protect the firm from liability, and you'll cooperate with any investigation into your trades. And if I refuse, then I'll personally walk every piece of evidence Miss Mercer has gathered into the federal prosecutor's office and make sure you face charges for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Richard's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. Your choice. Wilson looked at both of them, saw that he'd lost, that there was no way out that didn't end in destruction. Fine, he said finally. I'll resign, but I want immunity, full immunity from prosecution. You want... Ava couldn't finish the sentence. Rage was choking her. You want immunity after what you did? That's my price. Take it or leave it. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. I'll see what I can arrange. But you don't leave this building until we have a deal in writing. And if you try to destroy evidence or contact anyone involved in the investigation, I will burn you myself. Understood? Understood. Richard stood and walked to the door. Security will escort you to your office. You'll remain there until we have resolution. Don't make me regret showing you mercy. Wilson left, flanked by 2 security guards. The door closed behind him. Ava and Richard stood alone in the conference room with evidence of betrayal spread across the table. What happens now? Ava asked. Now I call the prosecutor. Arrange a meeting. Present evidence that Damien's crimes were less extensive than initially believed. Richard looked at her. This doesn't exonerate him. He's still guilty, but it might reduce his sentence significantly. How significantly? 5 years? Maybe less with good behavior. Richard's expression was sad. It's not perfect, but it's better than 20. 5 years. Damien would be in his mid-40s when he got out. The firm would be gone, his reputation destroyed, his life unrecognizable. But he'd be alive. He'd be free eventually, and maybe, there would be a chance to rebuild. What about me? Ava's voice was quiet. Do I still have to testify? No. With Wilson's confession, you're no longer a target. You'll need to give a statement about what you knew and when you knew it, but you're not facing charges. Richard paused. You're also not employed here anymore. The words hit like a slap. What? Miss Mercer, you led an unauthorized investigation into a senior partner. You confronted him without legal counsel present. You potentially compromised the firm's ability to negotiate immunity. Richard's voice was gentle but firm. I understand why you did it, and frankly, I respect the hell out of you for having the courage. But I can't keep you on staff after this. Ava felt her chest tighten. So I saved Damien and lost everything anyway. You saved a man you love from spending his life in prison. That's not nothing. Richard moved toward the door. For what it's worth, you were one of the best strategists this firm ever had. And when this is all over, when the dust settles, you'll have your choice of positions anywhere in New York. What you did today, taking down Wilson, finding the truth, that takes more skill than 100 merger strategies. He left. Ava stood alone in the conference room with empty coffee cups and evidence of crimes that would destroy multiple lives. She'd done it. She'd exposed Wilson. She'd found evidence that might reduce Damien's sentence, and she'd lost everything in the process. Her job, her career at the firm, her reputation as someone who could be trusted to follow rules. But when she closed her eyes, she could still see Damien's face in that detention center. Could still hear him begging her to save herself, could still feel the way her heart had cracked when he'd confessed to crimes that would take him away from her for years. And she knew she'd make the same choice again. She pulled out her phone and called Martin Reeves. He answered on the first ring. "Miss Mercer, I have information about Wilson, about trades that weren't Damien's, about evidence that could help his case." She was talking fast, words tumbling over each other. "Richard's setting up a meeting with the prosecutor, but I need you to be there. I need you to make sure they understand that Damien's not as guilty as the evidence suggests." "Slow down. What did you find?" She told him everything. Wilson's confession, the piggyback trades, the manipulated timeline, the evidence that suggested Damien had committed 15 trades over 18 months, not the 30-plus the government was claiming. When she finished, Reeves was quiet for a moment. Then, "This could work. This could actually work. If Wilson agrees to testify, if Richard backs up your investigation, we might be able to negotiate a plea deal. Get the sentence down to something manageable." "How manageable?" 3 to 5 years. Maybe less if we argue coercion and grief-induced judgment. His voice gained energy. "Miss Mercer, do you understand what you've done? You might have just saved his life." Her voice broke. "I just needed him to not spend 20 years in prison for crimes someone else committed." "Well, you succeeded. Now I need you to write down everything Wilson said, every detail of your investigation, every piece of evidence you found. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good. I'll call you when we have a meeting scheduled. And Miss Mercer?" "Yeah?" "Damien's lucky to have you." The words settled into her chest like warmth, like something that might eventually feel like hope. Reeves hung up. Ava gathered the evidence folders and left the conference room. The 48th floor was chaos. Word had already spread about Wilson's resignation. Associates whispered in clusters. Partners held emergency meetings. And everyone stared as Ava walked past. Let them stare. She'd already lost everything that mattered. Their judgment couldn't touch her anymore. Jennifer was still at her desk. She looked up as Ava approached. "Is it true? Did Wilson really—" "Yeah, he did." Ava set the folders on the desk. "These are for Richard, evidence he'll need for the prosecutor." Jennifer took them with careful hands. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know." It was the most honest answer Ava had given in days. "Wait. Hope. Pray that 5 years is better than 20. For what it's worth," Jennifer said quietly, "I always knew you earned your position. Everyone who actually worked with you knew. It was just the people who were threatened by you who wanted to believe otherwise." The words hit harder than Ava expected. She blinked back tears. "Thank you." She left the 48th floor for what might be the last time, rode the elevator down in silence, walked through the lobby where she'd entered 1,000 times before as an employee, a strategist, someone who belonged. Now she was just another person leaving a building. No title, no position, no future she could see clearly. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. New York kept moving, taxis honking, people rushing past, the city's heartbeat steady and indifferent to individual tragedy. Riley was waiting by the car. She pulled Ava into a hug without asking questions. "Did it work?" she asked finally. "I think so. Maybe." Wilson confessed. Richard's working with the prosecutor. Damien might get a reduced sentence. Ava pulled back. "And I'm unemployed." "Well, that's about what I expected." Riley opened the car door. "Come on, let's go get drunk and figure out what the hell you're going to do with your life now." They drove back to Brooklyn, ordered takeout, opened a bottle of wine that turned into 2 bottles, sat on Riley's couch while the sun set and the city lights came on, and Ava tried to process everything that had happened in the last 72 hours. She'd fallen in love with her boss, been publicly humiliated, lost a billion-dollar merger, discovered the man she loved was a criminal, exposed a conspiracy, lost her job, and possibly saved Damien from life in prison. It was Tuesday. "What are you going to do if he gets out in 5 years?" Riley asked around midnight. Ava stared at her wine glass. "I don't know. Wait for him, maybe, if he wants me to. That's a long time to put your life on hold." "I know. And there's no guarantee he'll even want to see you after everything." "I know that too." Riley was quiet for a moment, then, "But you're going to wait anyway." "Yeah." Ava felt tears building again. "I'm going to wait anyway, because I'm apparently an idiot who falls in love with criminals and destroys her career for people who tell her to walk away. Or," Riley said gently, "you're someone who loves hard enough to fight for what matters, even when it's impossible, even when it costs everything." Ava leaned her head on Riley's shoulder and let the tears come. Let herself grieve for the life she'd built and lost. Let herself feel the exhaustion and the fear and the tiny, fragile hope that maybe she and Damien would survive this. Her phone buzzed. A text from Martin Reeves. Reeves. "Meeting scheduled for tomorrow, 9 a.m. Prosecutor, Richard, Wilson's attorney, and me. You need to be there to present your evidence. This is it. This is our chance." Ava read the message 3 times. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. The meeting that would determine whether Damien spent 20 years in prison or something less. The meeting that would decide whether Wilson faced consequences or walked away with immunity. The meeting that would reshape everything. She texted back with shaking hands. "Ava, I'll be there." She set down her phone and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would walk into a federal prosecutor's office and gamble everything on a theory built from desperation and too little sleep. Tomorrow she would stand in front of people who had the power to destroy what was left of her life and tell them the truth about Wilson's crimes. Tomorrow she would fight for Damien one last time. But tonight she just sat on Riley's couch with wine and takeout containers and her best friend's shoulder to cry on, and tried to remember how to breathe. Tried to remember that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was keep fighting even when you'd already lost. Tried to believe that 5 years wasn't forever. And somewhere in federal custody, Damien Vale sat in a cell thinking about the woman who'd refused to give up on him even when he'd begged her to. Thinking about the way she'd looked at him through reinforced glass and promised to fight. Thinking about how he'd spent 5 years building walls to protect himself from grief, only to have her tear them all down in a matter of weeks. Thinking about whether he deserved her loyalty, whether he deserved her love, whether he deserved anything except the prison sentence he'd earned through his own arrogance and desperation. And knowing that whatever happened tomorrow, whatever the prosecutor decided, whatever plea deal they negotiated, he would spend the rest of his life trying to become the man she'd seen when she looked at him, the man who was worth fighting for, even if he didn't believe it himself yet. The night stretched on, and morning came too fast, carrying with it the reckoning they'd both been running toward since a voice note had been sent to the wrong recipient and started this entire cascade of destruction. But that final confrontation was still hours away. For now, they both just waited in the darkness and hoped that the truth would be enough to save them, or at least enough to make the fall less catastrophic. The federal prosecutor's office was everything Ava expected, and worse. Sterile, cold, the kind of place where careers ended and lives were dismantled with bureaucratic efficiency. She sat in a waiting room with gray walls and uncomfortable chairs, while her future hung in the balance somewhere behind closed doors. Martin Reeves sat beside her, reviewing notes on his tablet. Richard Blackthorne stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the Manhattan skyline like it held answers. And somewhere in another room, Wilson and his attorney were making their own calculations, their own deals. "They're taking a long time," Ava said. Her voice sounded strange, too loud in the quiet. "Good." Reeves didn't look up from his tablet. "Long means they're considering our evidence seriously. Short would mean they'd already made up their minds. Or it means they're building a case against me too." "They're not." He glanced at her. "I made sure of that before we walked in here. You're a witness, not a target. As long as you tell the truth, you're protected." The truth. Such a simple concept. Such an impossible thing to nail down when emotions and loyalty and love got tangled up in facts. The door opened. A woman in a sharp suit emerged. Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Chen, the prosecutor handling Damien's case. She looked tired. Ava recognized the exhaustion in her eyes, the look of someone who'd been working too many hours on too little sleep. "We're ready for you," Chen said. Ava stood on legs that felt like water, followed Reeves and Richard through the door into a conference room that looked exactly like every conference room she'd ever worked in. Same long table, same uncomfortable chairs, same fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly dead. But the people sitting around the table made her stomach drop. Chen sat at the head. Wilson and his attorney sat on one side, Wilson looking smaller somehow, diminished. And on the other side, 2 FBI agents she didn't recognize, and a man in an expensive suit who had SEC written all over him. "Ms. Mercer," Chen gestured to a chair, "please sit. We have questions." Ava sat. Reeves settled beside her. Richard took a position standing against the wall, removed enough to maintain objectivity, close enough to intervene if needed. "Let's start with what you found," Chen said, opening a folder. "You claim that Michael Wilson made unauthorized trades using Damien Vale's offshore accounts. Walk me through your evidence." Ava took a breath, steadied herself, then began. She laid out the timeline. The trades made when Damien was traveling, the merger information Wilson had access to that Damien didn't, the patterns that didn't fit Damien's meticulous approach, the confession Wilson had made in front of Richard. Chen listened without interrupting, took notes, occasionally glanced at the FBI agents who were doing the same. When Ava finished, Chen looked at Wilson. "Do you dispute any of this?" Wilson shifted in his seat. His attorney whispered something. Then Wilson spoke, his voice flat and defeated. "No, it's accurate. I made 15 trades using accounts I'd discovered during an audit. I used information from mergers I was consulting on, and I included those trades in the evidence I sent to the SEC to make Damien look worse than he was." "Why?" The question hung in the air. Wilson was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because I believed he was destroying the firm, making reckless decisions, building a cult of personality that made it impossible to challenge him. I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought if I exposed him, the board would finally see that he needed to be removed, that I could do better." "So you committed federal crimes to justify your ambition." Chen's voice was ice. "I committed federal crimes because his crimes gave me the opportunity." Wilson looked at her directly for the first time. "I'm guilty. I know that. But so is he. And removing my trades from his total doesn't make him innocent. It just makes him slightly less guilty." Chen turned to Ava. "Do you agree with that assessment?" It would be so easy to lie, to say Damien was blameless, to paint him as a victim of Wilson's manipulation. But Ava had spent 3 years at Blackthorne and Vale learning that the truth was the only thing that held up under scrutiny. "Yes," she said quietly. "Damien committed insider trading, 15 trades over 18 months. He broke the law. He deserves to face consequences for that." She met Chen's eyes. "But he doesn't deserve to face consequences for Wilson's crimes too. And the evidence you have right now doesn't distinguish between them." Chen looked at the FBI agents. Some silent communication passed between them. Then she looked at Richard. "Mr. Blackthorne, you've been investigating this internally?" "I have." Richard moved to the table. "And I believe Ms. Mercer's analysis is correct. Wilson acted independently, used Damien's infrastructure for his own benefit, and then weaponized the evidence to destroy him. Can you prove the timeline she's suggesting? I can provide travel records, client meeting schedules, documentation that shows Damien couldn't have been physically present or available to make the trades Wilson is claiming." Richard pulled out a tablet. "I can also provide testimony from Jennifer Chen, Damien's executive assistant, who tracked his schedule meticulously. She can confirm which trades occurred when he was unreachable." Chen studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at her notes. "Here's what I'm prepared to offer. Wilson pleads guilty to 15 counts of securities fraud and insider trading. He cooperates fully with our investigation. He provides documentation of every trade he made. In exchange, we recommend a sentence of 8 to 10 years with possibility of parole." Wilson's attorney leaned forward. "We were hoping for 5. 8 to 10, non-negotiable." Chen's voice was steel. "Your client didn't just commit crimes. He obstructed justice by manipulating evidence. He actively made our investigation more complicated. That has consequences." The attorney whispered to Wilson. Wilson's face had gone pale, but he nodded. "As for Damien Vale," Chen continued, looking at Reeves now. We're prepared to amend the charges. 15 counts instead of 31. We'll recommend 5 years with possibility of parole after 3. But he has to plead guilty. No trial, no appeals, clean admission of guilt. 5 years, 3 with good behavior. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't freedom. But it was so much better than 20 that Ava felt dizzy with relief. I'll need to discuss it with my client, Reeves said carefully, but I believe he'll accept those terms. You have 24 hours. Chen closed her folder. After that, the original charges stand and we go to trial. And trust me, a jury won't be as sympathetic as I'm being right now. The meeting ended. Papers were signed, arrangements were made, and Ava walked out of the federal prosecutor's office feeling like she'd just survived a car crash. Shaking, exhausted, grateful to be alive. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright. Too bright. Everything felt surreal, like she'd stepped into a parallel universe where consequences existed but mercy was still possible. You did it. Richard stood beside her on the steps. You actually did it. We did it. Ava looked at him. You backed me up, provided the evidence I needed. Without you, Chen wouldn't have listened. Maybe. Richard's expression was unreadable. Or maybe you would have found another way. You're remarkably persistent when you want something. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. He handed her a business card. This is a friend of mine. Runs a boutique consulting firm in Boston. She's been looking for a senior strategist with your particular skill set. If you're interested, mention my name. She owes me a favor. Ava stared at the card. You're helping me find a job after I just helped destroy your firm's reputation? You saved what was left of this firm by exposing Wilson before he could do more damage. And you saved Damien from spending his life in prison. Richard's voice was quiet. I'd say that earns you a recommendation. He walked away before she could respond, left her standing on the courthouse steps with a business card and the beginning of something that might eventually feel like a future. Reeves approached, phone already pressed to his ear. I'm heading to the detention center now. I'll present the deal to Damien. He'll take it. I know he will. He looked at Ava. Do you want to come? She did, desperately. Wanted to see Damien's face when he heard that his sentence had been cut from 20 years to 5. Wanted to watch the relief hit him. Wanted to be there. But something held her back. No, she said. This is between you and him. His decision. I'll wait. Reeves nodded like he understood. Then he left. Ava stood alone on the courthouse steps while the city moved around her. She pulled out her phone and called the one person who'd been with her through all of this. Riley answered on the first ring. Well? 5 years, maybe 3 with good behavior. Ava's voice cracked. It worked. Everything we did, it actually worked. Jesus Christ. Riley's relief was palpable, even through the phone. Okay, where are you? Courthouse, Federal Plaza. Stay there. I'm coming to get you. We're going somewhere that doesn't smell like lawyers and broken dreams. Riley picked her up 20 minutes later and drove them to Central Park. They walked to the Bethesda fountain and sat on the edge, watching tourists take photos and street musicians play for dollars. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that Ava's world had just been rebuilt from rubble. What happens now? Riley asked. I don't know. Ava leaned back on her hands, face tilted toward the sun. Damien goes to prison. Wilson goes to prison. The firm probably collapses under the weight of scandal. And She stopped. I have no idea what I do. You start over. Where? Anywhere? Everywhere. Riley nudged her shoulder. You're 32. You just took down a corrupt senior partner and negotiated with federal prosecutors. You think any firm in New York wouldn't kill to have you? Any firm in New York knows I slept with my boss and caused a billion-dollar merger to collapse. Any firm in New York knows you're brilliant and brave and loyal to a fault. Riley's voice was fierce. So yeah, you've got baggage. Everyone does. The question is whether you're going to let it define you or whether you're going to use it to build something better. Ava was quiet, thinking about Richard's business card in her pocket, thinking about Boston, about starting over somewhere new where no one knew her story, where she could be just another strategist instead of the woman from the scandal. I'm going to wait for him, she said finally. Riley looked at her. For 5 years? For however long it takes. Ava met her eyes. I know that sounds insane. I know it's probably stupid, but I can't walk away from him now. Not after everything, even though he told you to. Especially because he told me to. She smiled sadly. He spent 5 years after his brother died pushing everyone away, building walls, refusing to let anyone matter. And then I came along and accidentally tore all of that down. So yeah, I'm going to wait. Because someone needs to be there when he gets out. Someone needs to prove that love isn't just something that happens when everything's easy. Riley was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled Ava into a hug. You're either the bravest person I know or the most foolish. I haven't decided which yet. Can't I be both? Yeah, you definitely are. They sat by the fountain until the sun started to set, until the tourists thinned out and the musicians packed up their instruments, until Ava's phone buzzed with a text from Martin Reeves. He accepted the deal, sentencing in 2 weeks. He asked if you'd be there. Ava's throat was tight as she typed back. Ava, I'll be there. The 2 weeks that followed were strange, liminal. Ava moved through them like she was underwater. She packed up her apartment, knowing she couldn't afford it without a job, put her things in storage, moved temporarily into Riley's guest room while she figured out what came next. She called the number on Richard's business card, had a phone interview with a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who ran a consulting firm in Boston specializing in nonprofit strategy. The conversation went well, better than well. Patricia offered her a position as senior strategist starting in 3 months. I need someone who understands how to navigate complex stakeholder dynamics, Patricia said. Someone who can handle pressure, someone who's been through fire and came out stronger. From what Richard tells me, that's you. Ava accepted. Not because Boston was where she wanted to be, but because it was somewhere. A direction. A purpose. The sentencing hearing was held in the same courthouse where Ava had presented evidence 2 weeks earlier. She sat in the gallery with Riley on one side and Jennifer Chen on the other, watched as Damien was led in wearing a suit instead of the orange jumpsuit. His lawyer had arranged it, some small dignity before the hammer fell. He looked thinner, older. The 2 weeks in custody had carved something away from him. But when he glanced back and saw Ava sitting there, something in his expression softened. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or love that he wasn't allowed to express with guards watching. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. She reviewed the case files, listened to the prosecutor's recommendation, heard from Reeves about Damien's cooperation and the mitigating circumstances Wilson had created. Then she looked at Damien. Mr. Vale, do you have anything you'd like to say before I impose sentence? Damien stood. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. Your Honor, I don't have excuses. I committed crimes. I broke laws designed to protect investors and maintain market integrity. I did it because I was desperate and grieving and convinced that the ends justified the means. He paused. I was wrong, and I'm prepared to face the consequences of that. Is there anything else? Damien hesitated. Then, I destroyed a lot of lives through my choices, employees who trusted me, clients who believed in the firm. A woman who, his voice caught, a woman who deserves so much better than to get caught in the wreckage. If I could take it back, I would. But I can't. So all I can do is accept responsibility and try to become someone worthy of the second chance I don't deserve. The judge was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. I've presided over hundreds of white-collar cases, and I've learned that the ones who express genuine remorse are rare. Most defendants blame circumstances, blame partners, blame the system itself. She looked at Damien directly. You're not doing that, which suggests to me that you understand the gravity of what you've done. So I'm inclined to accept the prosecution's recommendation. 5 years in a federal correctional facility, eligible for parole after 3 years pending good behavior and completion of rehabilitative programs. You'll also pay full restitution of profits gained through illegal trades, roughly $2.3 million. She brought down the gavel. 5 years. It was done. Damien turned and looked at Ava one last time before the guards led him away. Their eyes met across the courtroom. And in that moment, Ava saw everything he couldn't say out loud. Saw the love and the regret and the hope that maybe She wouldn't give up on him. She nodded. A tiny movement, a promise. Then he was gone. The courtroom emptied. Riley and Jennifer said goodbye and left. And Ava sat alone in the gallery while the next case was called, and life continued with ruthless efficiency. She'd done it. She'd saved him from 20 years. She'd exposed Wilson. She'd fought every battle she could fight. And now came the hardest part, the waiting. 3 months later, Ava was standing in a sleek conference room in Boston, overlooking the harbor. Patricia's firm was smaller than Blackthorne and Vale, but focused, purpose-driven. They worked with nonprofits and social enterprises trying to scale their impact. It was strategy work with meaning beyond profit margins. Ava had thrown herself into it, worked 80-hour weeks, led 3 major projects in her first month, proved to everyone and herself that she could build a career on her own merit, that the scandal didn't define her. But late at night, when the work was done and the office was empty, she thought about Damien, wondered how he was surviving prison, whether he was sleeping, whether he thought about her. She wrote him letters, long ones, about her new job, about Boston, about the clients she was working with, about how Riley had started dating someone and seemed happy, about small, meaningless details that added up to a life continuing without him. She didn't know if he received them, didn't know if he read them, but she kept writing anyway. The first letter from him arrived 6 months after sentencing. Ava's hand shook as she opened it. His handwriting was familiar, precise and controlled, but the words were raw in ways his voice had never been. Ava, I don't know if you'll read this. Don't know if you should. But I've started writing you a dozen letters and thrown them all away, and I realize that silence is just another form of cowardice. Prison is exactly what I deserve. The routine, the loss of control, the time to think about every mistake I made. I spend hours every day remembering the moment I made that first trade, the moment I crossed the line, and I can trace a direct path from that choice to this cell. But the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at night, is knowing that I dragged you into this, that my crimes became your burden, that you had to fight battles I should have prevented. Your letters are the only thing keeping me human. When you write about your work in Boston, about the projects you're leading, about the life you're building, it reminds me that some good came from all of this, that you survived, that you're thriving. I don't expect you to wait. Don't expect you to put your life on hold for someone who doesn't deserve your loyalty. But I need you to know that loving you was the only thing I did right in 5 years of mistakes. And when I get out, if you're still there, I'm going to spend the rest of my life becoming the man you saw when you looked at me. The man worth fighting for. D. Ava read the letter 3 times, cried through the second reading, then she sat down and wrote back. The letters became a rhythm. Once a week, sometimes more, they wrote about everything and nothing, about prison routines and consulting projects and books they were reading, about the ways they were changing, growing, becoming people who might deserve a second chance. 1 year became 2, 2 became 3. Ava built a life in Boston, got promoted to partner at Patricia's firm, bought a small apartment in Back Bay with exposed brick and windows overlooking the Charles River, made friends, went on dates that never went anywhere because her heart was still tangled up with someone in federal prison. Riley visited every few months, usually to tell Ava she was insane for waiting, but always staying to help her paint the apartment or cook dinner or just sit on the couch drinking wine and acknowledging that love made people do impossible things. You know he might be different when he gets out, Riley said during one visit. Prison changes people. He might not be the man you remember. I know. Ava stared at the letter in her hands, the latest one from Damien talking about a rehabilitation program he'd completed. But I'm different too. We both are. Maybe that's the point. Maybe we needed to fall apart so we could rebuild into people who actually fit together. That's either very wise or very naive. Definitely both. 3 years and 2 months after sentencing, Ava got a phone call from Martin Reeves. He made parole, Reeves said without preamble. Early release for good behavior and completion of all rehabilitative requirements. He'll be out in 2 weeks. Ava's heart stopped. Started again too fast. 2 weeks? April 15th, morning release. I'm arranging transportation and helping him get set up with temporary housing and parole requirements. But he asked, Reeves paused. He asked if you'd be there when he gets out. Said he'd understand if you couldn't, if you'd moved on, but that he had to ask. Tell him yes. The words came out before Ava could second guess them. Tell him I'll be there. The 2 weeks crawled by. Ava took time off work. Drove down to New York, stayed with Riley, barely slept. Spent hours trying on outfits and feeling ridiculous because what did it matter what she wore to pick up the man she loved from federal prison after 3 years apart? The morning of April 15th dawned gray and cool. Spring rain threatening. Ava drove to the correctional facility in upstate New York with her hands tight on the steering wheel and her stomach in knots. She parked in the visitor lot, waited in her car, watched the main gates. At 9:37 a.m., they opened, and Damian Vale walked out into freedom. He looked different, leaner, harder. His hair was shorter. His face had new lines around his eyes and mouth. He wore jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, civilian clothes that looked strange on him after years of prison uniforms and designer suits. He stood for a moment in the parking lot, blinking in the sunlight like he'd forgotten what it felt like. Then his eyes found her car, found her sitting in the driver's seat with tears already streaming down her face. Their eyes met through the windshield, and Ava saw everything she needed to know, saw that 3 years hadn't erased what they'd built, saw that prison had changed him but not destroyed him, saw that he was looking at her the same way he'd looked at her in that Chicago hotel room, like she was the only thing that mattered in a world that had tried to take everything else. She got out of the car. They stood on opposite sides of the parking lot, 20 feet apart, 3 years and a lifetime of mistakes between them. You came, Damian said. His voice was rough, unused to talking freely. Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped, but I didn't. He stopped, swallowed hard. You shouldn't have waited. Probably not. Ava was walking toward him now, closing the distance. But I'm apparently very bad at doing what I should. Ava is, don't. She was standing right in front of him now, close enough to touch, but not touching yet. Don't tell me I should have moved on. Don't tell me I wasted 3 years. Don't tell me you're not worth it, because I've spent 3 years building a life I'm proud of while waiting for you, and those things aren't mutually exclusive. Damian was looking at her like she was something holy, something he'd prayed for but never believed would arrive. I don't deserve you. Probably not. She smiled through tears. But you're stuck with me anyway. Unless... Her voice caught. Unless you don't want this anymore. Unless prison changed too much. Unless I'm not... He kissed her. It was different than before, slower, more careful, like he was relearning how to touch her, like he couldn't quite believe she was real and solid and there. When they broke apart, both of them were crying. I wrote you 273 letters, Damian said against her forehead, every week for 3 years, and every single one ended the same way, with me promising that if you were still there when I got out, I'd spend the rest of my life proving I could be someone worthy of you. You don't have to prove anything. Yes, I do. He pulled back enough to look at her. I destroyed my career, my firm, my reputation. But you rebuilt everything I took from you. You created something better. And I need to do the same. Need to become someone who deserves to stand beside you instead of dragging you down. Damian, I'm serious. His hands were shaking as they framed her face. I have nothing right now. No money, no job, no reputation. Just parole requirements and a record that will follow me forever. And I won't ask you to sacrifice anything else for me until I've built something worth offering you. Ava understood what he was saying, understood the pride that made him need to stand on his own first. But she also understood something he didn't seem to. You don't get to decide that alone, she said firmly. You don't get to protect me from hardship by pushing me away. That's what you did for 5 years after Marcus died, and it nearly destroyed you. So no, you don't get to do that again. What are you saying? I'm saying we figure this out together. You rebuild your life. I support mine. We take it slow. We don't rush into anything, but we do it together instead of you trying to be some perfect version of yourself before you'll let me in. She grabbed his hands. I didn't wait 3 years for perfect. I waited for you, flawed and broken and trying. That's what I want. That's what I've always wanted. Damian was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and disbelief. You're absolutely insane. Yeah, you mentioned that before. And you're sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He pulled her close again, held her like he'd been drowning for 3 years and she was air. And Ava let herself sink into it, let herself feel the relief of having him back. Let herself believe that maybe, they'd survived the worst of it. "I got a job offer," Damien said after a while. "Teaching business ethics at a community college in Boston. It's not much. The pay is terrible. But the dean thought my perspective might be valuable for students trying to navigate the corporate world." Ava pulled back to look at him. "Boston?" "It was the only place that would hire a convicted felon, and it happened to be where you are. Coincidentally." His smile was tentative. "If that's too much. If you need space, it's not too much." She was smiling now, really smiling for the first time in 3 years. "It's perfect." They drove back to New York together, spent a week at Riley's apartment dealing with parole paperwork and probation requirements and all the bureaucratic nightmare of re-entry. Damien slept on the couch. Ava slept in the guest room. They didn't rush anything, just existed in the same space, relearning each other, building something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. Riley watched them with barely concealed amusement. "You two are disgustingly wholesome for people who met through a scandal." "We're trying a new approach," Ava said. "It's called not destroying our lives." "How's that working out?" "Ask me in a year." They moved to Boston together, found a tiny apartment in Cambridge within walking distance of both the community college and Ava's firm. It had one bedroom and a kitchen the size of a closet and windows that looked out at a brick wall. It was perfect. Damien started teaching Business Ethics 101, a room full of community college students who didn't care about his scandal, just wanted to pass the class and get on with their lives. He was terrified the first day, came home shaking. But by the end of the first week, he was energized in ways Ava hadn't seen since before his arrest. "I told them about the trades today," he said over dinner one night, "about what I did, why I did it, what it cost me. And you know what one student said?" "What?" She said thank you, said she'd been considering cutting corners at her job to meet quotas, and hearing me talk about consequences made her realize it wasn't worth it. He looked at Ava with something like wonder. "I spent 15 years building a consulting empire, but I think I helped more people in that 1 hour than in my entire career. You're a good teacher. I'm a cautionary tale." But he was smiling. "It's surprisingly satisfying." Months passed, then a year, then 2. Ava continued to thrive at Patricia's firm, led projects that won awards, got written up in business journals as one of Boston's rising strategists. But she made sure to leave work at work, made sure to have dinners with Damien, made sure to build a life that wasn't just about success. Damien's teaching career grew. He started advising students, mentoring first-generation college kids trying to break into business. He wrote articles about corporate ethics and rehabilitation. Slowly, carefully, rebuilt a reputation as someone who'd failed spectacularly and was trying to do better. They fought sometimes. About money, about his lingering guilt, about her tendency to work too much, about whether he should reach out to former colleagues or if that door was closed forever. Normal couple fights, the kind that ended in apologies and compromise instead of destruction. "We're boring now," Ava said one night. They were on their couch watching a documentary about corporate fraud. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Good," Damien pulled her closer. "Boring is underrated. Remember when boring meant we'd failed? That was a different life, different people." He kissed the top of her head. "These people are much smarter." 2.5 years after Damien's release, they drove to the Hudson Valley for a weekend, found a small bed and breakfast surrounded by trees and hiking trails. Spent 2 days doing nothing except walking and talking and existing without the weight of the city pressing down on them. On Sunday morning, they hiked to a viewpoint overlooking the valley. The leaves were just starting to turn, early October painting the world in gold and red. The air was crisp, perfect. Damien stopped at the viewpoint, turned to face Ava. "I need to ask you something," he said. Ava's heart started pounding. "Okay." 5 years ago, a terrified strategist sent a voice note to the wrong recipient and accidentally called me dangerously attractive. His smile was soft, vulnerable. And I was so angry at first, angry that she'd been careless, angry that it exposed something I'd been trying to hide, angry that she'd seen through the walls I'd built. "Damien, let me finish." He took her hands. "That voice note destroyed my career. destroyed my firm, led to federal charges and prison time and the complete dismantling of everything I'd spent 15 years building, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it. Tears were already burning behind Ava's eyes. Because that voice note also gave me you, Damien continued. Gave me someone who saw past the reputation and the money and the control. Someone who fought for me when I didn't deserve it. Someone who waited when every logical person would have walked away. Someone who loved me enough to help me become a better person. He dropped to one knee. Ava's breath caught. I don't have much, he said. His voice was shaking. I teach at a community college. I'm still on parole. I have a criminal record that will follow me forever. But I have you, and I have 5 years of perspective that taught me what actually matters. So I'm asking... He pulled out a simple silver ring, nothing fancy. Nothing like the extravagant jewelry he could have afforded in his previous life. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that mistakes don't have to define us? That failure can be the beginning of something better? Ava was crying now. Full ugly crying. You're asking me to marry you at a viewpoint in the Hudson Valley? You said once you wanted something small, something quiet, something that was just about us instead of appearances. He smiled through his own tears. Is this quiet enough? It's perfect. She pulled him to his feet. Yes, obviously yes. I waited 3 years while you were in prison. You think I'm going to say no now? He slid the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. Simple and unpretentious and exactly right. They stood on the viewpoint overlooking the Hudson Valley while the October leaves fell around them and the whole world felt like it was starting over. Like the past 5 years had been a storm they'd survived, and this was the quiet after, the rebuilding. No big wedding, Ava said against his shoulder. No press, no corporate colleagues judging us. Just the people who actually matter. Agreed. Damien held her tighter. Although Riley's going to have opinions. Riley always has opinions. Your father's going to cry. My father cries at commercials. He'll be a mess. They laughed, and it felt good. It felt normal. It felt like a future that wasn't defined by scandal or mistakes or things they couldn't take back. 6 months later, they got married. Not in a cathedral or ballroom. In Riley's backyard in Brooklyn on a Saturday afternoon in April. Exactly 6 years after Damien had been released from prison. Exactly 7 years after a voice note had been sent to the wrong recipient and started everything. The guest list was small. Riley and her girlfriend. Patricia from Ava's firm. Jennifer Chen, who'd stayed in touch through everything. A handful of Damien's students who'd become friends. And Ava's father, who did indeed cry through the entire ceremony. There was no expensive catering, no designer dress, no photographer except Riley's girlfriend with a decent camera. Just folding chairs and a rented tent and vows written by 2 people who'd learned the hard way that promises meant everything. When Damien slipped a simple gold band on Ava's finger, he said, I promise to never lie to you again. To never hide behind walls or control or the belief that protecting you means pushing you away. I promise to be worth the fight you put up for me, even though I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. When Ava slipped a matching band on his finger, she said, I promise to never stop fighting. For us. For the life we're building. For the belief that people can change and mistakes don't have to be permanent. I promise to love you not despite your failures, but because of how you've rebuilt from them. They kissed while their small collection of loved ones cheered. And for the first time since that October morning 7 years ago, everything felt right. Not perfect. Not without scars. But right in the way that only comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you. At the reception, which was really just everyone eating pizza on Riley's back deck, Ava found a moment alone with her father. He'd aged in the last 7 years. More gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes. But he was smiling wider than she'd seen in years. I'm proud of you, kiddo, he said quietly. Even though I caused a massive scandal and my career imploded, especially because of that. He squeezed her hand. I spent 40 years breaking my back so you could have opportunities, so you could build something, and you did. You built something so solid that when it got torn down, you knew how to rebuild it. That's not failure. That's resilience. I destroyed a billion-dollar merger. You saved a good man from life in prison. You exposed corruption. You stood up for what was right even when it cost you everything. He looked at Damien across the deck, talking to some of his students. And you found someone who makes you happy, who challenges you, who sees you. That's worth more than any merger. Ava hugged him, let herself feel the safety of being someone's daughter, of having someone who loved her unconditionally, even when she made spectacular mistakes. Later, when the sun had set and the string lights came on and everyone was slightly drunk on cheap wine and good company, Ava found herself standing with Damien away from the crowd, looking at the Brooklyn skyline, at Manhattan rising across the river like a reminder of everything they'd lost and survived. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Any of it?" Damien was quiet for a moment, then, "I regret the crimes. I regret the people I hurt. I regret the greed and desperation that made me think laws didn't apply to me. But the rest of it," he looked at her. "The voice note, the investigation, the prison time, everything that led to this moment. No, I don't regret that, because it gave me you, and it gave me a chance to become someone better." That's a very redemptive way to look at federal prison. "I had 3 years to work on my perspective." He pulled her close. "What about you? Do you regret waiting?" Ava thought about it. About the 3 years of letters and loneliness, about building a career in Boston while everyone asked why she wasn't dating, about the voice note that had started everything. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret any of it, because I got you, and I got to learn that I'm strong enough to survive the worst thing I could imagine. That's worth something. It's worth everything." They stood there while the party continued behind them, while Riley gave a toast that was equal parts beautiful and inappropriate, while Ava's father tried to start a conga line and Damien's students cheered him on. And somewhere in the chaos and laughter and imperfect joy of it all, Ava realized something. She'd spent her 20s trying to build a perfect career, trying to be flawless, trying to never make mistakes or show weakness or let anyone see her struggle. And then she'd sent a voice note to the wrong recipient, made one careless error born from exhaustion. And it had destroyed everything she'd built. But it had also created something better. A life that wasn't about perfection. A career that had meaning beyond profit. A relationship built on honesty instead of appearances. A version of herself that was stronger because she'd been broken. 6 months later, Ava found out she was pregnant. She told Damien on a Tuesday evening while they were cooking dinner in their tiny kitchen. Just blurted it out while chopping vegetables because subtlety had never been her strong suit. He dropped the wooden spoon he was holding, stared at her. "What?" "I'm pregnant, about 8 weeks. I took 3 tests just to be sure, but yeah, we're having a baby." She was grinning now, couldn't help it. Surprise. Damien crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and kissed her. "We're having a baby." "That's what I just said. We're having a baby." He laughed, full and joyful and disbelieving. "A tiny human, who's going to be half you and half me and completely terrifying. Very terrifying." "What if I'm a terrible father?" "You won't be." Ava touched his face. "You're going to be the father who teaches our kid that mistakes are part of being human, that failure isn't permanent, that sometimes the best things come from the worst moments." That's a lot of pressure. Good thing you've had practice handling pressure. Their daughter was born on a cold January morning, 7 pounds, 6 ounces. Dark hair like Damien, eyes that would eventually turn the same brown as Ava's. Lungs that worked perfectly, demonstrated by the powerful screams she unleashed the moment she entered the world. They named her Elena, after Damien's mother, after Ava's grandmother. A name that meant light. Ava held her daughter in the hospital room while Damien sat beside them looking simultaneously terrified and awestruck. And she thought about the voice note, about the mistake that had started everything, about how she'd been so worried about being 3 minutes late to a meeting that she'd accidentally recorded a confession and sent it to 300 people on Saturday, about how that moment of carelessness had led to this, to a husband who'd been to prison and back, to a daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, to a life that was nothing like she'd planned and better than she could have imagined. "Hey," Damien said softly, "what are you thinking?" "That I'm really glad I overslept that morning." He smiled. "Me too." "Even though it destroyed your life?" "It didn't destroy my life." He reached over and touched Elena's tiny hand. She wrapped her fingers around his immediately. "It destroyed the life I thought I wanted, which turned out to be a gift." They sat in the hospital room while snow fell outside the window, and Elena slept and the world kept turning. And Ava felt something settle in her chest, Something that had been restless and anxious for years finally going quiet. Peace, maybe. Or just the understanding that life wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about what you built from them. 2 years later, on a random Thursday afternoon, Ava was working from home when an email notification popped up on her screen. She almost deleted it. Spam, probably, or another conference invitation she didn't have time for. But something made her open it. It was from a junior associate at Blackthorn in Vale, someone Ava had never worked with. The email was short. Miss Mercer. You don't know me, but I wanted to reach out because something happened today that I thought you should hear about. I was terrified to come into work this morning. I'd made a mistake on a client presentation, nothing catastrophic, but significant, and I was convinced I'd be fired, that my career was over before it started. Instead, my manager sat me down and told me about you. About the voice note. About how you'd made a mistake that seemed career-ending, but instead led to exposing corruption and saving someone's life and building something better. She said, "Mistakes are how we learn who we are under pressure. What matters is what you do next." I just wanted you to know that the story you probably thought destroyed your reputation has become something different here. It's become a reminder that we're all human, that perfection is impossible, that sometimes our worst moments lead to our best selves. Thank you for that. Sarah Chen. Ava read the email 3 times. Then she showed it to Damien when he got home from teaching. "You're a legend," he said, grinning. "I'm a cautionary tale." "You're both." He pulled her close. "And apparently you're teaching people that failure isn't fatal, which is pretty damn good for someone who accidentally sent a voice note to the entire company. I hate that we're always going to be the voice note couple. Could be worse. We could be boring." Ava laughed. "We are boring now. We have a toddler and a mortgage and jobs we care about. That's the definition of boring. We have a toddler and a mortgage because we survive federal charges and prison time and corporate warfare. I think that disqualifies us from boring." He kissed her. "Besides, boring with you is my favorite thing." That night, after Elena was asleep and the dishes were done and the world was quiet, Ava pulled out her laptop, opened a new document, and started writing. Not a business strategy. Not a consulting proposal, but a story. Her story. The truth about what had happened 7 years ago when she'd been so terrified of being 3 minutes late that she'd changed the entire trajectory of her life. She wrote about the voice note, about Damien, about the merger that collapsed and the investigation that followed, and the prison sentence that should have ended everything. She wrote about Wilson's betrayal and Richard's mercy and Riley's steadfast friendship. She wrote about 3 years of letters and waiting and believing in something everyone said was doomed. And she wrote about what came after, about rebuilding, about teaching business ethics to community college students and leading nonprofit strategies, and raising a daughter who would grow up knowing that her parents had made spectacular mistakes and survived them. She wrote until her fingers ached and her eyes blurred. Wrote until the story felt complete. Wrote until she'd exorcised every demon and doubt and moment of shame that had haunted her for 7 years. When she finished, she saved the document and closed her laptop. Maybe she'd publish it someday. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe it was enough just to have written it, to have claimed her story instead of letting other people define it. "You okay?" Damien asked from the doorway. "Yeah." Ava turned to face him. "I'm really okay." And she was. 7 years after a voice note sent to the wrong recipient. 6 years after a federal investigation destroyed everything she'd built. 5 years after she'd watched the man she loved get sentenced to prison. 4 years after his release. 3 years after they'd gotten married. Ava Mercer, now Ava Mercer Vale, though she'd kept her maiden name professionally, stood in her Boston apartment with her husband and her daughter sleeping down the hall, and a career she was proud of, and a life that was messy and imperfect and absolutely worth every mistake that had led to it. She thought about that exhausted strategist who'd overslept one October morning, who'd been so terrified of being late that she'd recorded a panicked voice note and sent it to 300 people instead of one. And she wished she could go back and tell that version of herself that everything was going to be okay, that the catastrophe she was about to walk into would hurt and cost her everything, and ultimately give her more than she'd lost. That sometimes the worst thing that could happen was actually the beginning of the best thing. That love was worth fighting for even when it looked like losing. That resilience wasn't about never falling down. It was about standing back up. again and again and again. But she couldn't go back. No one could. All she could do was move forward with the knowledge that mistakes were part of being human, that failure wasn't fatal, that sometimes you had to lose everything to discover what actually mattered. Outside the window, Boston glittered in the darkness. Another city, another life, another version of the woman who'd once stood in a Manhattan elevator with her heart racing and her future collapsing. But this version was stronger, happier, more honest. This version knew that the voice note everyone remembered as a scandal was actually the beginning of everything good. And somewhere in the other room, Damian Vale, former managing partner, convicted felon, current community college professor, devoted husband and father, was reading the email from Sarah Chen again and smiling at the idea that their mistakes had become someone else's permission to be human. He looked up and saw Ava watching him from the doorway. And in that moment, everything that had happened over the last 7 years, all the pain and the fear and the fighting and the waiting, compressed into something simple, worth it, all of it, every mistake, every consequence, every moment of thinking they wouldn't survive, worth it for this, for each other, for the life they'd built from rubble. "Come to bed," Ava said. Damien closed his laptop, took her hand, followed her down the hall past Elena's room where their daughter slept peacefully, completely unaware that her parents' love story had started with a catastrophic error that everyone thought would destroy them. And in the quiet of their bedroom, with the Boston night settling around them and 7 years of history woven into every touch, they fell asleep tangled together. Two people who'd been broken by their own mistakes and each other's crimes. Two people who'd rebuilt themselves into something better. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the worst thing you could do was actually the beginning of the best life you could live. The voice note that had started everything was still out there somewhere, probably deleted from most people's phones, probably forgotten by everyone except the two people it had brought together. But Ava kept a copy, hidden in a folder on her laptop labeled Origins. And sometimes late at night when she needed a reminder of how far they'd come, she'd listen to it. Hear her own exhausted voice calling Damien controlling and arrogant and dangerously attractive. Hear the panic that had turned into something so much more. And she'd smile. Because that terrified strategist in the elevator had no idea what she was about to walk into. No idea that her entire life was about to implode. No idea that she'd fall in love with the man she was talking about. No idea that 7 years later, she'd be living in Boston with a husband and a daughter and a career that felt like purpose instead of just ambition. No idea that the worst moment of her life would become the beginning of the best. But Ava knew now. And that made all the difference.